The rumble of 18 wheels beneath you becomes a sort of white noise after a while. 10 years hauling freight across the Midwest, and I've learned to find comfort in that constant vibration. I've been driving the same Peterbilt 389 since 2015, crisscrossing Ohio and the surrounding states more times than I could possibly count. Most people think that truck driving is boring. They picture endless stretches of highway, the same sights over and over. And sure, yeah, there's plenty of that. But what they don't realize is that the road is a way of showing you things that don't make any sense in the light of day. I've kept a journal of sorts over the years. Started as notes in my phone, things that I didn't want to forget. Now it's become something of an obsession, documenting the unexplainable things that I've witnessed on these lonely highways. I'm not saying that I believe in the supernatural. I'm just saying that I can't explain everything that I've seen. Let me tell you about some of them. This happened about 8 years ago, somewhere along I-70 eastbound. It was early October and Ohio was showing off with those brilliant fall colors. I was hauling automotive parts from Indianapolis to Columbus, a route that I had driven maybe 100 times before. It was around 3 a.m., that dead zone when your eyelids get heavy and the coffee's worn off, but you've still got hours to go. The road was practically empty, just me and the occasional passenger car every 20 minutes or so. I remember checking my mirrors and seeing nothing but darkness behind me when I passed mile marker 347. That's when my headlights caught her. A woman standing on the shoulder, thumb out like she was hitching a ride, in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning. She wore a blue sundress, completely inappropriate for the 40-degree night, and had this long, dark hair that whipped around her face in the wind. No luggage, no purse, nothing. Just standing there, staring directly at me as I passed. I'm not in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, especially not in the middle of the night, but something about her sent a chill up my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. And the second that it took for my truck to pass her, I swear she never blinked, just stared with these hollow eyes that seemed to follow me. The rational part of my brain started making excuses. Maybe she had car trouble, maybe she was walking to the next exit. But that didn't explain the inappropriate clothing or why she was out there alone in the first place. I radioed it in to any other truckers in the area, thinking that somebody should check if she needed help. 2 other drivers responded that they had just passed that same section of highway and hadn't seen any woman. I might have convinced myself that I was hallucinating from fatigue, except for what happened next. About 20 miles down the road, I pulled into a rest stop to use the bathroom and grab a fresh coffee. As I was walking back to my truck, coffee in hand, I glanced at the cab of my Peterbilt. There she was, the same woman sitting in the passenger seat of my locked truck, just sitting there staring straight ahead, hands folded in her lap. I dropped my coffee and fumbled for my keys, but by the time that I got the door open, the cab was empty. No sign that anybody had been there. No wet footprints, no indentation in the seat, nothing. I didn't sleep for the rest of that haul, and I still get goosebumps when I drive past mile marker 347. I've never seen her again, but other truckers have stories about a woman in a blue dress along that stretch. Some say she was killed by a hit-and-run driver back in the 80s. Others say that she's been appearing on that road since the 1950s. All I know is what I saw, and I still can't explain it. This one's been happening on and off for years, and it's not just me. Ask any trucker who regularly drives through eastern Ohio about the midnight conversation, and you'll see their face change. It always happens after midnight, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., and almost exclusively on rural stretches of highway, where you don't expect much CB traffic. It starts off with static, and then a voice comes through. Sounds like an older man, kind of gravelly, like he's been smoking unfiltered cigarettes his whole life. He always starts off the same way. Breaker 19, this is eastbound Charlie looking for a westbound Mac. You out there, Mac? over. The first time that I heard it, I thought nothing of it. Truckers use the CB to chat all the time, helps keep us awake. But then another voice answers, younger but still male, saying, "This is westbound Mac. I read you, Charlie. What's your 20? Over." And that's when things get weird. They start having this conversation that sounds completely normal at first. Weather, road conditions, usual trucker talk. But if you listen long enough, you realize they're talking about landmarks and highways that do not exist, towns that aren't on the map, and the conversation always circles around to the same thing, a terrible accident that's about to happen. "You watch yourself coming through Dayton tonight, Mac," Charlie will say. "Bad wreck coming, 17 vehicles, only 2 survivors." "When's it happening, Charlie?" Mac will ask. And Charlie always says, "Already happened, son, 30 years ago tonight. I was there, you were there." And then the static takes over and you can't hear anything else. Here's the thing, I've tried to respond to them, so have other drivers. They never acknowledge us like we're not even there. I've asked state troopers about bad accidents near Dayton, but nothing matches what Charlie describes. So one night about 3 years ago, I was driving through a bad storm near the Ohio and West Virginia border when the conversation came through. Listening to it gave me the creeps as usual, but I had more important things to worry about, like the sheets of rain reducing visibility to almost nothing. That's when Charlie's voice came through clearer than I had ever heard it before. "Eastbound rig, mile marker 221, this is Charlie. You need to pull right over now, driver. Right now." He was talking to me. I was eastbound and I had just passed mile marker 220. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. "Eastbound driver, I'm not playing games. Pull over in the next quarter mile or you won't make it home." Something in his voice made me listen. I slowed down and eased onto the shoulder, putting my hazards on. Less than a minute after I stopped, lightning struck a tree about 100 yards ahead of me. The whole thing came crashing down across the highway right where I would have been if I hadn't stopped. I sat there shaking and then grabbed my CB. "Charlie, this is the eastbound driver. I don't know how you knew, but thank you." No response, just static. This happened last winter and it still bothers me when I think about it. I was hauling a load up through the eastern part of the state, taking the scenic route on Highway 93 instead of the interstate. It was getting late and a snowstorm was picking up. The weather report hadn't called for anything serious, but you know how Ohio winters can be, unpredictable. By 9 p.m. the snow was coming down so hard that I could barely see 20 feet in front of me. I needed to stop and wait it out. That's when I saw the lights of what looked like a truck stop up ahead. Not one that I recognized, but beggars can't be choosers in a blizzard. I pulled in and was surprised to see about 6 other trucks parked there. The place looked old but well maintained. One of those mom and pop operations that have mostly disappeared with the big chains all taking over. The sign said Halliday's Rest Stop, which didn't ring any bells, but again, I didn't care as long as they had coffee and a bathroom. Walking in, I got an odd feeling right away. The place was clean and warm with a small diner section and a convenience store area. 1950s music played softly from speakers somewhere. But what struck me was that despite the trucks outside, there were only 2 people in the place. A middle-aged waitress behind the counter and 1 customer, an older man in a flannel shirt sitting at the counter. "Evening," the waitress said with a smile. Her name tag read Doris. "Just you?" I nodded, stamping snow from my boots. "Nasty out there, it came out of nowhere." "Always does," she said, pouring coffee without asking if I wanted anything. "The special tonight is meatloaf." I thanked her and took a seat at the booth, a few spots away from the man at the counter. The whole place had this weird vibe, like I had stepped back in time. No Wi-Fi password displayed, no TV. Even the prices on the menu seemed too low. The old man at the counter caught me looking around and nodded at me. First time at Halliday's. Yeah, I said, I don't usually come up this way. He chuckled. Oh, none of us plan to. Storms always bring us in. Something about the way that he said it made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on my menu, but I could feel him watching me. The waitress brought my coffee and I ordered the meatloaf special. While I waited, I pulled out my phone to check the weather. No signal, not even one bar. Oh, phone won't work here, honey, Doris said as she passed by. Never does. I ate quickly, keeping to myself. The food was good, really good actually, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about this place. The old man kept stealing glances at me, and I noticed that he wasn't actually eating, just nursing the same cup of coffee. When I finished, I asked for my check. That'll be $8.50, Doris said. Cash only. I paid, leaving a generous tip. Something told me that I should stay on her good side. You stay in the night? She asked, making change. In my sleeper, I said. Storm should pass through by morning. She gave me an odd look. It might be best to move on now. A road to the east, it clears up about 5 miles out. The old man spoke up then. Yeah, she's right. Best not stay too long at Halliday's your first time around. Some folks never leave. I thanked them both, thoroughly creeped out by now, and headed back to my truck. The snow was still coming down hard, but something made me take their advice. I started up my rig and pulled out, heading east as Doris had suggested. Sure enough, 5 miles down the road, the snow just suddenly stopped, like driving through a curtain. 1 minute a blizzard, the next, clear skies and stars. I pulled over at the first chain gas station I saw and went inside to ask about Halliday's. The cashier, a young guy with a patchy beard, looked confused. Halliday's on 93. Man, that place burned down like 30 years ago. Old man Halliday and his wife died in the fire. What? I said. That's impossible. I was just there. I had dinner. There were other trucks. He shrugged. I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing there now but a concrete pad and some ruins. Been that way since before I was born. I didn't believe him. I got back in my truck the next morning and drove back that way in daylight. Found the turnoff where I had pulled in the night before. There was nothing there. Just a cracked concrete foundation, some charred wooden beams, and a rusted sign barely legible through decades of weathering. Halliday's rest stop. No other trucks, no diner, no Doris. I've asked other truckers about it since then. A few, very few, have had similar experiences. Always during unexpected snowstorms, and always the same descriptions of Doris and the old man. Always the warning not to stay too long. I don't take Highway 93 anymore if I can help it, especially not in the winter. This one still gives me chills because, unlike some of the other stories I've told you, I've never found anybody else who's experienced anything similar. It happened to me and only me as far as I know. About 4 years ago, I was driving a late-night run down State Route 33 heading southeast from Columbus toward the West Virginia border. It was April, mild weather, clear skies with a full moon, perfect driving conditions. Around 1 a.m., I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual about that except they seemed to be gaining on me fast. Within a minute, there was a car right on my tail, so close that I couldn't even see its headlights anymore, just the glow reflecting off my trailer. Now any trucker will tell you that this is dangerous as hell. If I had to brake suddenly, whoever was behind me would go right under my trailer, a death sentence for them. I tapped my brakes lightly, just enough to make my taillights flash as a warning, but the car didn't back off. I increased my speed a little, thinking they would pass me when the passing lane opened up. Soon enough, the lane widened, but the car stayed right on my tail. By this point, I was getting annoyed. I sped up to 70, over the limit for a truck my size, but they still clung to my back end. In the moonlight, I could just make out the shape in my mirrors. It looked like an older model car, maybe from the 70s, big and boxy. I couldn't see the driver. This went on for about 20 minutes. Every time the road opened to 2 lanes, I expected them to pass, but they never did. Just maintained that uncomfortably close distance, perfectly matching my speed. Finally, I decided to pull into the next rest stop and let them go around. There was one coming up in a few miles, so I put on my signal early to make my intentions clear. The moment that my blinker went on, the car finally backed off a little bit. I pulled into the rest area, completely empty at that hour, and I watched my mirror expecting the car to continue down the highway. Instead, it followed me in. At this point, I was starting to get concerned. Road rage is somebody looking to hijack my cargo. I reached for the baseball bat that I kept in my cab just to be safe. The car parked about 50 feet behind my truck. In my mirror, I could see that it was indeed an old sedan, a Chevy Capri from the 70s, dark green or maybe blue, hard to tell in the moonlight. The driver's door opened and a man got out. Even from that distance, something seemed off about him. He moved stiffly, mechanically, like his joints didn't bend quite right. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a suit, and he just stood there beside his car staring at my truck. I wasn't about to get out and confront him. I decided to just pull back onto the highway and continue my route. I started my engine, but before I could put it into gear, my CB radio crackled to life.
"Driver, this is a message for you,"
came a voice through the static. It was flat and emotionless, with a slight metallic quality that didn't sound quite human. I hesitated and then picked up the handset. "Who is this?"
"I've been following you, driver,"
the voice replied. My blood ran cold. "What do you want?" I asked, watching the figure in my mirror. He hadn't moved, still standing perfectly still beside his car.
"To warn you, you will reach a bridge in 17 miles. Do not cross it."
What? Why? But no response came. The CB went silent. In my mirror, I watched as the man got back into his car with those same stiff, unnatural movements. He started his engine, backed up, and drove out of the rest area, continuing down Route 33. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I say? Some guy followed me, knew my name, and told me to not cross a bridge. They would think that I was drunk or high. Eventually, I pulled myself together and got back on the road. As I drove, I counted down the miles, a feeling of dread growing with each passing marker. Whatever bridge that he was talking about would be coming up soon. At mile 16, I saw it in the distance, a small bridge spanning a creek, nothing special. As I approached, I noticed something on the bridge, flashing lights. As I got closer, I could make out police cars, an ambulance, and a tow truck. I slowed down as I reached them. A state trooper waved me to a stop. "What happened?" I asked him, rolling down my window. "Drunk driver crashed through the guardrail about an hour ago. Car's down in the creek. Still working on getting the body out." "What kind of car?" I asked, already knowing the answer somehow. "An old Chevy Capri, I think. 70s model, dark blue." I thanked him and drove on, my hands shaking on the wheel. I've spent countless hours trying to figure out what had happened that night. The same car that followed me had already crashed and the driver was dead. Was I being warned by what? The driver's ghost? Some kind of anomaly? I've driven Route 33 many times since then. I've never seen that car again, never heard that voice on my CB. But I always make sure to slow down when I get to that bridge, half expecting to see those headlights in my mirror again. When you've been driving trucks for as long as I have, you develop a kind of sixth sense about deliveries. You can tell when something's not right about a shipment. Maybe the paperwork seems off or the location doesn't match the type of cargo. 9 times out of 10, there's a simple explanation, but sometimes things just don't add up. This particular incident happened about 5 years ago in the middle of a brutal January cold snap. I was given a last-minute assignment to deliver a single shipping container to an address on Chestnut Hill Road, about 30 miles outside of Columbus. A few things struck me as odd right from the start. First, the paperwork was vague about the contents, just listed it as medical equipment. Second, the shipment was given priority status, meaning that I was to deliver it as soon as possible, regardless of regular hours. And third, the delivery location wasn't a hospital or a medical facility. The address corresponded to what seemed to be an abandoned factory in the middle of nowhere. I questioned my dispatcher about it, but he just said the client had paid a premium for fast and discreet delivery, and that all the paperwork was in order. Times were tough for the company back then, and we had just lost a major contract, so I figured we were taking whatever jobs that we could get. I picked up the container from a nondescript warehouse in Cincinnati. It was sealed, which wasn't unusual, but what caught my attention was the weight of it. Far lighter than what you would expect for a container that size filled with medical equipment. I also noticed that it was refrigerated, maintaining a constant 34 degrees Fahrenheit. The drive started normally enough. It was around 9 p.m. when I set out, with an estimated arrival time of around midnight. The roads were relatively clear despite the recent snowfall, and I made good time heading northeast. About halfway through the journey, my truck's electronics started acting up. The GPS flickered on and off, the radio jumped between stations, and even my digital dashboard display glitched occasionally. I chalked it up to the cold weather affecting the electronics, and I kept on driving. As I got closer to the destination, the roads became increasingly remote and poorly maintained. The last 10 miles were on an unplowed, single-lane road that didn't look like it had seen traffic in weeks. My headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating nothing but dense forest on either side. I finally arrived at the address at around 12:30 a.m. The factory turned out to be an enormous concrete building that looked like it had dated back to the 1940s or earlier. No signs indicated what it had once been used for. There were no other vehicles in sight, no lights except for a single bulb above what appeared to be the loading dock. And no people, just this massive, dark structure in the middle of a forest. I pulled up to the loading dock and called the contact number that I had been given. A man answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting by the phone.
"You've arrived,"
he said. Not a question, but a statement. "Yes, I have a delivery of medical equipment," I replied.
"Leave the container at the dock. Somebody will unload it."
"I need a signature for delivery confirmation," I said, following protocol. A long pause.
"Wait in your vehicle. Somebody will come out."
I sat in my truck for nearly 15 minutes. The temperature had dropped to well below zero, and an unnatural silence hung in the air. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just dead silence in the biting cold. Finally, the door to the loading dock opened. 3 men emerged, all wearing what looked like hazmat suits without the helmets. They moved with practiced efficiency, barely acknowledging me as they began to work on opening the container. One of them approached my window. Up close, I could see his face was gaunt, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. "A delivery confirmation," I said, holding out the digital pad that we used for signatures. He signed it quickly. "You saw nothing here tonight," he said, handing the pad back. "But what is this place?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. He stared at me for a moment. "Research facility, government contract. That's all you need to know." I nodded, but as I was putting the pad away, I glanced toward the container. The other 2 men had opened it, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside before they moved to block my view. It wasn't medical equipment. The container was filled with what looked like large, cylindrical tanks, each about the size of a person arranged in rows. They were frosted over, clearly keeping whatever was inside very cold, and there were cables, dozens of them, connecting each tank to what appeared to be a monitoring equipment. The man at my window noticed me looking. "Leave now, forget what you've seen." Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. I put my truck in gear and started to pull away. As I did, I caught one final glimpse in my side mirror. They were unloading one of the tanks and condensation was pouring off of it like fog. For just a second, I thought I saw something moving inside, pressing up against the glass. I drove away as fast as was safe on that icy road. About a mile from the facility, my GPS suddenly came back online and all my electronics returned to normal. I made it back to my home that night. Since then, I haven't had any other assignments to that location, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Now everybody's heard of the Moonville Tunnel down in Vinton County. It's an old railroad tunnel with all the ghost stories attached to it. But there's another tunnel, less well known, that sits abandoned along an old mining railroad track in eastern Ohio. No tourist websites mention it, no ghost hunters visit it. It doesn't even have a name that I've ever heard. It's just there, forgotten by almost everyone. I wouldn't have known about it either if my GPS hadn't sent me on a detour down a country road that passed near it about 6 years ago. I was hauling a load from Cleveland to Marietta, and there had been a bad accident on the highway that shut down all southbound lanes. The GPS recalculated and sent me on what it promised was the fastest alternative route. The route quickly deteriorated from a paved county road to a gravel path barely wide enough for my rig. I was about to turn around when my GPS insisted that I was only 3 miles from a main road that would take me back to the highway. Deciding that going forward was better than backing up on the narrow road, I pressed on. And that's when I saw it. A stone archway emerging from the hillside, almost completely overgrown with vegetation. I would have missed it entirely if not for the setting sun hitting it at just the right angle. It was clearly man-made, an old railroad tunnel from the looks of it. I would have just driven past and forgotten about it, but my truck chose that moment to sputter out and die. The engine cut out completely without warning. I tried to restart it, but nothing happened. No response at all, like somebody had disconnected the battery. It was getting dark out, and I had no cell phone service out here. I decided to try walking to find a signal, thinking that I would head toward where the main road was supposed to be. I grabbed my flashlight, locked my truck, and I started walking. Something drew me toward the tunnel first. Professional curiosity, I told myself. I had never seen an abandoned tunnel up close before. As I approached, I could see that it was in bad shape. The stone archway was crumbling and part of the tunnel appeared to have collapsed about 20 feet in. Railroad ties rotted on the ground, the steel rails long since removed. I shined my flashlight inside. Cool air flowed out, carrying a musty mineral smell. Nothing unusual for an old tunnel. I was about to turn away when I heard it. A voice, faint but distinct, coming from inside. "Help, please." I froze. It sounded like a child's voice. A young boy, maybe 8 or 10 years old. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" No response. I hesitated and then stepped into the tunnel entrance, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The collapse that I had seen from outside had blocked about half the tunnel width, leaving a narrow passage along the right side. "Is somebody in here? Do you need help?" I called out louder this time. "Help me, I'm stuck." The voice came again from somewhere behind the collapse. Every instinct told me to go back to my truck and wait for another vehicle to pass by. This was how horror movies started. But if there really was a kid trapped in there. I squeezed past the collapsed section, careful not to disturb any loose rocks. Beyond it, the tunnel continued for maybe another 100 feet before ending in a solid wall of fallen stone and dirt. A complete cave-in. "Where are you at?" I called out, scanning the walls and floor with my flashlight. No sign of anyone. "I'm here, behind the wall." The voice was clearer now, definitely coming from beyond the cave-in. "They left me here." "Who left you? How long have you been in there?" I asked, approaching the wall of debris cautiously. "They left me after the collapse. They couldn't reach me." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cool air. This didn't feel right. I knew that I should leave. Whatever was happening here wasn't a child in immediate danger, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Curiosity, compassion, or maybe just the strange pull of the place. I don't think that I can help you. This collapse is massive. You can. The voice insisted, taking on an oddly persuasive tone that didn't sound childlike anymore. Just move a few rocks and make an opening. I can squeeze through a small space. I noticed something then that made my blood run cold. While the voice was talking about squeezing through, my flashlight beam caught movement in the wall of debris. The dirt between some of the rocks was shifting. It was bulging outward slightly as if something on the other side was pressing against it. "What are you?" I whispered. The voice changed, dropping any pretense of being a child. It became deeper with an unnatural resonance that seemed to vibrate through the stones themselves. "Somebody who has waited a very long time for company. Let me out. Let me ride with you, trucker. The things I could show you on the road at night." The bulging dirt moved again, more forcefully this time. Small stones shifted and fell away from the wall. Something dark began to seep through the spaces between the rocks, not water or mud, but something that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight rather than reflect it. I turned and ran, squeezing back through the partial collapse and not stopping until I had made it back to my truck. To my shock, it started immediately when I turned the key, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. As I pulled away, I glanced in my mirror. In the fading daylight, I could see a figure standing at the tunnel entrance, small, like a child from a distance, but its proportions were all wrong. Its too thin arms were too long. It raised one elongated hand as if waving goodbye. Most truck drivers in Ohio have had close calls with deer. They're everywhere, especially during rutting season when the bucks lose whatever sense of self-preservation they normally have. You get used to scanning the tree lines at dusk and dawn, watching for that telltale movement, the flash of eyes reflecting your headlights. What happened to me on Route 13 near Mansville was different though. It was early November, peak season for deer vehicle collisions. I was hauling a load of paper products up to a distribution center, making good time despite the intermittent fog that had settled in the low-lying areas. The road there cuts through some pretty dense forest with steep embankments on either side in places. Not much room to maneuver if something runs out in front of you. Around 5:30 in the morning, just before sunrise, the fog had thickened considerably. I slowed down to about 45 miles per hour, high beams cutting through the murky gray as best they could. And that's when I saw it. A massive buck standing right in the middle of my lane, maybe 50 yards ahead. I hit the brakes, not slamming them because that's asking for a jackknife, but firmly. The truck slowed and I laid on the horn, hoping to scare the animal out of the way. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring directly at my approaching truck. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was the biggest whitetail buck that I had ever seen, maybe a 14-pointer with a rack spread wider than my shoulders. But something was wrong with it. Even through the fog, I could see its hide wasn't the healthy brown that you would expect. It was patchy with areas that looked almost bare, like flesh without skin. I was down to about 30 miles per hour now, still closing distance and still blaring my horn. Any normal deer would have bolted long ago. This one did finally move, but not to run away. It lowered its head, pointing that massive rack of antlers directly at my truck, and it pawed at the ground like it was going to charge. I swerved, taking my rig halfway onto the shoulder. A dangerous move, but better than hitting something that size. As the cab of my truck passed the deer, I got a clear look at it through my side window. What I saw doesn't make sense even now. The deer's face wasn't a deer's face, not entirely. Parts of it looked almost human. The eyes especially spaced wrong and the wrong color. A deep reddish brown that caught the light from my headlights and seemed to glow from within. And its mouth. Deer don't have lips that can pull back into what I can only describe as a grin. I kept driving, shaken but telling myself that I had just seen a diseased animal, maybe suffering from chronic wasting disease or some other condition that affected its appearance and behavior. And then I checked my side mirror and saw it running after my truck. Not alongside the road, as you might expect from a startled deer, but directly behind me, in my lane, galloping at a speed that no deer should be capable of. I was back up to almost 50 miles per hour at this point, and it was keeping pace. I watched, horrified as it gained on me. In the red glow of my taillights, its appearance seemed to shift, sometimes looking like a normal deer and sometimes like something else entirely, its proportions all wrong. The antlers, massive to begin with, looked even larger now, almost like branches of a tree spreading out in impossible directions. I floored it, pushing my rig as fast as I dared on the foggy road. For about a minute the deer kept pace, staying right behind my trailer. But then the road curved and I lost sight of it momentarily. When the road straightened out again, it was gone. I spent the rest of that drive white-knuckling the steering wheel, obsessively checking my mirrors every few seconds. I made it to the distribution center just as the sun was coming up, and I've never been so glad to see a loading dock in my life. I didn't tell anybody what I had seen. Who would believe me? A deer with a human face chasing a semi at highway speeds. I would sound insane. But I kept my eyes open for news reports or maybe somebody else that had seen it. Or maybe that there had been an accident involving a strange animal. Nothing. But over the next few months, I heard stories from other truckers, all in the same general area, all involving a deer that didn't look right or acted strange. One driver described a buck that stood on its hind legs as his truck passed by. Another swore that he saw one with too many legs and moving through the forest like a spider. Local hunters tell stories too if you get them talking after a few beers. They talk about deer they've tracked that left human-like footprints, about finding bucks with antlers so twisted that it isn't right, about hearing whispers from the tree line when field dressing their kills. In the years that have followed, I've heard from locals that they call that stretch of road Wendigo Road now. They say it's best not to drive it alone. I don't talk much about this one, but I will for you guys. Some things you just try to put behind you, file them away in that part of your brain labeled "don't open." But since I'm telling these stories, I might as well include the one that still wakes me up in a cold sweat some nights. 7 years ago, I was hauling a load of construction materials from Columbus to a site in Jackson, a smaller town in the southeastern part of the state. It was early March and we had had a weird weather pattern. Warm enough to melt the snow during the day and cold enough to freeze everything solid at night. Perfect conditions for black ice. I was ahead of schedule due to arrive at around 3 a.m. The road into Jackson winds through hills with a series of sharp curves and a bridge crossing over a deep ravine about 5 miles before you make it to town. As I approached that section, I slowed down to about 40 miles per hour, knowing the conditions might be treacherous. It was a clear night, a quarter moon providing just enough light to see the outlines of the hills against the sky. The bridge appeared around a bend, an old steel truss structure that had probably been there since the 1930s. As my headlights hit it, I saw something that made my chest tighten. A car on the bridge, sideways, its headlights pointing toward the guardrail. I immediately hit the brakes, pumping them to avoid locking up. My trailer started to fishtail slightly on the slick surface, but I managed to keep it under control. I was still about 100 yards from the bridge, slowing down rapidly. And that's when I saw the other headlights. Another car approaching the bridge from the opposite direction. I remember thinking, they're not going to see that stalled car in time. I laid on my horn, flashed my lights, anything to warn the approaching driver, but it was too late. The oncoming car hit a patch of ice just before the bridge skidded and slammed into the stalled vehicle at full speed. The impact sent both cars crashing through the guardrail. I managed to bring my rig to a stop about 50 feet from the bridge. I grabbed my flashlight and phone and ran toward the scene, already dialing 911. But as I reached the bridge, I realized with horror that the guardrail was intact. There were no cars, no sign of an accident at all. I stood there confused and shaken. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I more tired than I thought? The 911 operator answered and I hesitated before telling her I thought that I had seen an accident but might have been mistaken. She took my information and said that she would send a deputy to check it out anyway. I waited on the bridge for about 20 minutes until a sheriff's deputy arrived. He got out of his cruiser, flashlight in hand. "You reported an accident?" he asked, scanning the bridge with his light. I thought I saw 2 cars crash through the guardrail," I said, feeling foolish now. "But when I got here, there was nothing." He nodded, not looking partially surprised. "Where exactly did you think you saw them go over?" I pointed to a section of the guardrail on the north side of the bridge. "Right there. One car was stopped sideways on the bridge and another one hit it." The deputy walked to the spot and shined his light down into the ravine, and then he turned to me with an odd expression. "There is a car down there. Looks like it's been there a while though, probably not what you saw." My skin crawled. I joined him at the railing and peered down. Sure enough, about 40 feet below, I could make out the rusted remains of what looked like an older car, half submerged in the creek bed. "That's been there since before my time," the deputy said. "Accident back in the 90s, I think. They recovered the bodies but couldn't get the car out without specialized equipment. Department decided it wasn't worth the expense." I stood there trying to process what I had seen or thought that I had seen. "Do you get many accidents on this bridge?" The deputy hesitated before answering. "More than our share. This bend ices up pretty bad in the winter. We've had 3 fatal crashes here in the past decade. All of them on March 7th, strangely enough." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What's today's date?" "March 7th, he replied, giving me a knowing look. "You're not the first person to report seeing an accident here when there wasn't one. Happens just about every year on this date." He must have seen the color drain from my face because he added, "Local legend says it echoes of the first accident back in '63. That one was bad. Station wagon full of kids and a semi-truck. 7 fatalities in total." "The truck driver?" I asked, already knowing the answer somehow. "Only survivor," the deputy confirmed. "Lived another 40 years with the guilt, apparently. Locals say that he comes back every year trying to prevent it from happening again." I thanked the deputy for his time and returned to my truck, badly shaken. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or time loops or whatever you want to call it, but I know what I saw. Those headlights, the impact, the cars going over the guardrail that showed no damage afterward. It was all as real as anything that I've ever seen. I completed my delivery in Jackson that night, and I've had trips through there since. I always take a different road now, adding an hour to my drive if need be. The locals think it's because of the curves and the ice. I'll let them think that. But every year on March 7th, I think about that bridge and I wonder if some other driver is seeing those phantom headlights, hearing the crash that never happens in our time, feeling the helplessness of watching a tragedy you can't prevent. GPS is both a blessing and a curse for truck drivers. It can save your butt when you're trying to find an obscure delivery location, but it also can lead you straight into trouble. Low bridges, weight-restricted roads, or neighborhoods where an 18-wheeler has no business being. I learned to be skeptical of GPS directions early in my career, but even I couldn't have anticipated where it would lead me one foggy night in late October about 4 years ago. I was hauling a partial load from Zanesville to Cambridge, taking smaller state and county roads instead of doubling back to the interstate. It was around 10 p.m. and a heavy fog had settled into the valleys, limiting visibility to maybe 30 feet in some places. I was relying heavily on my GPS, taking it slow and carefully watching for signs at each turn. About halfway through the journey, the GPS instructed me to turn onto County Road 793. I did, noting that the pavement quickly deteriorated to a chip and seal surface barely wide enough for my rig. I slowed to a crawl, questioning whether I should turn around, but the GPS insisted this was the right way. After about 3 miles of this, the road curved sharply as I rounded the bend. The fog suddenly lifted. Like driving through a curtain, I emerged into a clear patch where I could see the night sky, stars shining brightly overhead. Below them sat a town that I had never seen before, maybe 24 buildings lining a main street, and a few residential streets branching off of it. The architecture looked old, early 1900s style, but everything was immaculately maintained. Streetlights cast a warm yellow glow over empty sidewalks. A sign at the town's edge read, "Welcome to Roscoe, population 312. I had never heard of Roscoe, but Ohio has plenty of tiny towns that don't make it onto most maps. My GPS showed that I was still on the road with no town indicated, but that wasn't unusual for older and smaller places. As I drove slowly down the main street, I noticed something odd. There were no people visible anywhere, despite several businesses appearing to be open. The local diner had lights on, and I could see place settings on the tables through the windows. The small movie theater's marquee advertised The Last Picture Show with Now playing beneath it, though the film was from the 1970s. Even the gas station looked operational. Price sign showing gasoline at $1.32 per gallon, a price that I hadn't seen in 20 years. I needed fuel and figured this was as good a place as any to stop. I pulled into the gas station, which thankfully had a layout spacious enough for my rig. When I shut off my engine, I was struck by the absolute silence. No distant traffic noise and no music from nearby buildings, not even insects or the wind. Just complete, unnatural quiet. I got out and approached the pumps. They were older but looked functional. No card readers, though apparently this was a pay-inside establishment. I walked to the store entrance, noting that my footsteps seemed abnormally loud in the stillness. Through the windows, I could see the interior was lit and looked fully stocked, but there was no attendant visible at the counter. The door opened with a cheerful bell jingle that made me jump in the silence. Inside, rows of snacks, drinks, and basic automotive supplies lined the shelves, all with packaging that looked like it was from the 1990s. Behind the counter, a coffee pot sat full on a burner, steam rising gently from it. "Hello?" I called out. "Anybody working?" No response. I walked the aisles, increasingly uneasy. Everything looked normal except for the dated products and the complete absence of people. No security cameras and no modern touchscreen registers, just an old mechanical cash register on the counter. Next to it sat a local newspaper. I picked it up looking for a date. The masthead read, "The Roscoe Register," with the date of October 17th, 1997, and a headline about the local high school football team's homecoming victory. That was over 20 years ago. I put the paper down, suddenly eager to leave. Whatever was going on here was not right, and I didn't want to be a part of it. I hurried back to my truck and started the engine, relieved when it turned over normally. As I pulled out of the gas station, I noticed movement in my side mirror, the first sign of life that I had seen in the town. A man stood in the entrance to the gas station watching me. He wore what looked like a mechanic's uniform, dark blue with a name patch that I couldn't read from that distance. Even from here, I could tell something was off about his appearance. He stood too still, and though I couldn't make out his features clearly, I had the distinct impression that he was smiling broadly. He raised one hand in greeting or warning as I drove away. I accelerated down the main street, passing the diner and the theater again. This time I thought that I saw faces in the windows, just glimpses of pale ovals tracking my progress. My skin crawled as I pushed the speed well beyond what was safe for the road. At the town's edge where I had seen the welcome sign earlier, the fog still hung like a wall. I plunged into it, blind for several seconds, until my headlights again showed nothing but the poorly maintained country road ahead. I drove another 10 miles before my heartbeat returned to normal. When I reached a major intersection with highway signs that I recognized, I pulled over and checked my GPS and map apps. According to them, I had just traveled along Road 793, which ran uninterrupted between the two larger towns. No town named Roscoe. When I made it to my destination, I asked several locals about Roscoe. Most had never heard of it. One elderly man at the delivery site, however, gave me a strange look when I mentioned the name. Roscoe's been gone for decades. Whole town was condemned and evacuated after the chemical spill from the plant nearby. They were supposed to demolish it, but funding fell through. Last I heard, it's just a bunch of abandoned buildings slowly falling apart. How did you hear about it? I muffled something about seeing an old road sign, and I changed the subject. Later, I researched Roscoe online. There was indeed a small town by that name that had been evacuated in '97 after a chemical accident contaminated the groundwater. The few photos I found showed dilapidated and overgrown buildings. Nothing like the pristine town that I had seen. According to the official records, the evacuation was completed on October 17th, 1997, the same date on the newspaper that I had seen. I don't know why I've been compiling these stories. Maybe it's therapeutic, a way to convince myself that I'm not crazy. Maybe it's just a warning to other drivers. Or maybe it's because some things need to be recorded and remembered, even if no one ever believes them. I've been on leave from driving for the past 3 months. The company calls it a stress leave, but both my dispatcher and I know that it's more than that. I have a handful of other stories that I might share with you in the future, but for now, I just want to get my mind off of things. Take my time not being on the road, just to relax and try to recuperate. Thank you all for listening. Stay safe out there. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Alright, quick question. Have you ever checked your bank statement and realized that you're still paying for something that you completely forgot about? I had that moment not too long ago, and it made me realize that I needed a better way to keep track of everything. And that's where Rocket Money comes in. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. What I like about it is how everything shows up in one place. You can see your subscriptions, your spending, and all your accounts together in one simple dashboard. It also automatically categorizes your transactions so you can actually see where your money is going each month. For me, it's been really helpful just getting that clear picture and setting simple budgets so I know that I'm staying on track. And if you spot a subscription that you don't want anymore, Rocket Money can help you cancel it right in the app with just a few taps, which saves a ton of time. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. One time near Prescott, Arizona, I witnessed a ghostly wagon train rumble across the scrub brush for nearly an hour. It kept pace with my truck as I screamed down the highway. The driver even doffed his cap to me. I returned the favor as he evaporated into a fine mist. Another time when I was hauling a load just south of Duluth, my truck nearly slammed into a Wendigo that crossed directly in front of me. The sucker was tall, near 12 feet, and made from bones that just didn't fit together right. Icy blue eyes and a deer skull looking through me, into my soul. Nearly gave me a heart attack. Or once during a full moon while I was on Highway 21 outside Lowman, Idaho. I stopped to take a piss roadside when something started moving in the tall grass. Hand to God, 6 people no taller than a foot dressed in blood-streaked deerskins walked out and fired about a dozen arrows at me in my truck. I yanked my pants up, pissed all over myself, but made it back into my truck before an arrow found me. Later, an old Shoshone man in a nearby hotel told me that I had probably seen the Namaragar, called them the people eaters, and boy howdy was I glad I'd cut my piss short to escape them. Point is, when you crisscross the country as often as I do, bearing witness to the bizarre becomes second nature. It can't be helped. Sometimes the universe's oddities finds your eyeballs and you have to adjust your understanding of the natural world a tick or two. The lessons you learned in school amount to a hill of beans after you've seen a skinwalker run along your truck for 2 miles or watched a UFO buzz a cornfield. Each time you witness something that colors outside the lines, our collective lack of knowledge about the natural world smacks you red in the face. But our knowledge about the supernatural world, paltry, non-existence. At best, we have guesses. At worst, superstitions. Hell, we know more about the mountains on Mars than we do about Bigfoot and his ilk. For all we know, Bigfoot is a Martian. I'll never understand why these things happen, but talk to any road dog and they'll tell you the same stories. It's part and parcel to the gig. You pull freight for any extended period of time and you're bound to have the weird find your world. Normally, I'd be able to compartmentalize these events. Those thoughts get stashed away in my mind's attic to be contemplated at another time. I'll trot them out a few times a year, usually when I'm bullshitting with other truckers or trying to tell a compelling story at a party. I may not understand the goings-on, but I know how to use them. The truth is, if I let those ideas into the wider framework of my brain, it'd be damn near impossible to do anything else but dwell on them. I'm a curious cat, always have been. I go down more rabbit holes than Bugs Bunny. How I keep my wits about me on the road. Here's something interesting about ants and aphids. Suddenly, I'm listening to 10 books about natural symbiosis, just how my brain works. But I can't do that with the supernatural. Not now, anyway. Maybe when I hang my keys up for good. I know myself, and if I started studying these strange events, I won't stop thinking about them. That wouldn't be good for the job. If I develop a healthy fear about the things I see all the time, well, makes the work impossible. Ignorance is bliss, right? If I sat and really thought about these encounters and what they mean in the grand scheme of things, I would die in that chair. So, while I understand that occult-like things exist in the world, I ain't high enough on the seniority ladder to understand their purpose. And they exist because we exist is the best that I've got. I don't make it any less unsettling, but it adds context that makes it easier to understand. Easier to ignore. If seeing a moth is as likely as seeing a Mothman, you can go on with the rest of your day without a care. Well, maybe not if it's the Mothman visiting you. In that case, I'd avoid all bridges just to be safe. It's a long way of saying that I don't spook easily. Takes something wild to make my heebies meet my jeebies. But they met recently and it's kept me up most nights. The dread sticks to me like a bad nickname. Most nights I'll nurse a lukewarm coffee and I'll let my mind wander. Try to see if I can stumble into the reason I went through what I did. I've gone as far as throwing I Ching coins, reading tea leaves, praying to any sort of deities, Pretty much anything you could think of to help divine any understanding of what happened. How these events not only changed the world, but my understanding of our place in it. Let me set the table for ya. I was hauling a bric-a-brac from Atlanta to Vegas and had a tight turnaround schedule. From Vegas, I'd head back east to Chicago and on to the next stop. The company had built in a bonus for an early delivery, and I wanted that extra cash more than I wanted sleep. My foot remained welded to the pedal. I was outside Omaha around midnight. Now Omaha's a fine town, but once you get outside the city limits, well, there ain't much to write home about. The traffic was damn near dead, which is to be expected around that time and place. Traveling through the country's boring stretches at night is a good habit to get into. As I was cruising along the interstate, listening to a book about these sea peoples and the Bronze Age collapse, my eye caught something along the side of the road. At highway speeds, things are seen in blurs. You get shapes and your brain fills in the rest. While details are scant, you have a good idea of what was stalking you. And this go around, it looked like a big dog. I didn't have time to dwell on it because it darted in front of my truck the second I saw it. I didn't swerve, you can't really. Swerving at those speeds with that weight, and you're halfway to jackknifing in the middle of nowhere. I winced and waited for the telltale thump of an animal getting caught under the wheels. It never came. My mirrors didn't show a twitching body on the road. Whatever had taken a chance at dashing out in front of the truck had won the lottery and somehow missed every single one of my tires. I whistled in admiration, tipped my cap to the little fella, and kept on driving. Without realizing it, I'd given my gas pedal a bit of a rest, and my speed had dipped down. Nearly crushing an innocent animal will do that to a person. The reduced speed allowed me to get a better view of the things outside my cab, including the person waving me down on the side of the road. I don't normally stop for hitchhikers, some truckers do. I've known solid dudes who are motivated by good deeds and will help in any way they can. I've also heard tales of less savory characters who stop for other, darker reasons. As a profession, long-haul trucking can be a refuge for shady people. It's a hard image to shake in the minds of regular folks. The person hailing me was a young woman in distress, dressed in a dark jacket and pants, not a smart outfit for nighttime hitchhiking, with a yellow knit hat on her mop of black curly hair. She probably wasn't a hitchhiker, but someone in a bad way. As I approached, the more frantic her waving and jumping became, my foot automatically shifted to the brake. I came to the stuttering halt about 10 feet in front of her. Her silhouette was tall in the truck's headlights. She jumped for joy and ran over to my door. I rolled down the window and nodded at the surrounding nothingness. "Oh, thank you for stopping. So many cars have passed me by." "What's going on?" "I was in a crash about 2 miles ahead. Ended up in a ditch and I can't get out. My phone is dead and I can't call a tow truck." You need a lift and a charge." "That'd be amazing. Don't feel super safe standing on the side of the highway in the middle of the night." My dashboard clock told me that I'd have time for a quick stop and still be on track for the bonus. Plus, I was peckish and wouldn't have minded getting a snack. I hit the unlock button and the woman cheered. She ran around the front of my truck. Her shadow passed by the headlights, but the passenger door never opened. I waited for a bit. Climbing into a big rig can be a chore for the uninitiated, but the handle never even twitched. A solid minute passed and there was no movement. I unhooked my seatbelt and slid over to the passenger side door and opened it. No one was there. Her footprints were visible in the loose dirt, boots with no pattern on the sole, but they stopped at the passenger door. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the entire length of the trailer, even glanced underneath it. There was no sign of her anywhere. She had vanished. My stomach twisted and a familiar feeling washed over me. Something unnatural was messing with me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and headed back to the cab of my truck. The whole time I prayed, whatever this thing was, it didn't jump out of the shadows and attack me. As I got to the driver's side door, my eyes caught the footprints again. They trailed off into the darkness toward the direction where she said her car had wrecked. Despite my animal brain screaming at me to get back inside for safety, I needed to follow these footprints and discover where they went. It was a short walk. The footprints began about 15 feet away, emerging from the ditch along the side of the road. I shone my light down the highway, hoping to have it reflect off her wrecked car, but it just kept traveling uninterrupted into the vast nothingness. A sickening thought bubbled up. What if this was a ploy to get me to leave the safety of the truck? I was in a vulnerable position with little more than a shitty flashlight in my fist to defend myself. That was enough to get me back into the truck. About 10 minutes later, a red flashing icon lit up on my dashboard. My utility lights along the body of my truck had gone out. A quick glimpse in the mirror showed me the dormant bulbs. I don't love driving without the utility lights on, but it wasn't a deal breaker. That bonus kept bouncing around in my head. Not ideal, but not worth stopping. I rolled on. 10 minutes after that, another warning light started glowing, and then another. Finally, my check engine light started glowing and the rig lurched and stuttered. I passed a sign that said a truck stop was 2 miles away. I sighed and saw the bonus money flying away from me, and I hit my blinker. Mother Trucker's Truck World was a chain of compound-style truck stops along the highways and byways of the country. Each one was a sprawling mecca for long haulers. Dozens of pumps, a repair shop, a fully stocked gas station with loads of gear and comfort items, showers, washing machines, fast food places, and sometimes a church. If you have to stop during your run, these are the go-to places. If there was a silver lining to my rig breaking down, it was that it happened near a Mother Trucker's. My engine sputtered and died as I rolled into the station. With the last remaining bit of momentum, I guided it toward the mechanic's garage. It came to a squeaking stop. After calling the company and telling them what had happened and how late I'd be, hopped out of the cab to head inside to talk to the mechanic. But something caught my eye. It was a loose wire still swaying from the drive. It was shredded. I've had damage to my rig over time, but this was new. The wires had been gnawed on as if a rat went to town on them. That wasn't plausible as the lights had went out while I was driving, and no rat can cling to my cab at those speeds, not even Master Splinter. I climbed up to get a closer look. The wires had a sticky greenish-yellow ooze dripping down them and puddling on the metal below. I had never seen anything like that before. I didn't want to touch it because it was still sizzling. No reason to add a personal injury to my already ruined night. I saw you roll in. What happened? It was the station's mechanic. According to his jumpsuit, his name was Boone. Some of the more high-end stops offered around-the-clock mechanics, and with my remaining good luck, I had stumbled into one. He was holding a cup of coffee in one hand and munching on a donut with the other. He was entirely too chipper for as late as it was. I climbed down and nodded back at the wires. It looks like something chewed through the line. Boone leaned in to better assess the frayed wires. Squirrels or rats are the likely culprits. Happens a lot in some of these rigs. Vermin hide and wreck shit when we least expect it. Kinda impressive when you think about it. I wasn't in the mood to be impressed by squirrels. And what vermin leaves a goo on the wires that they chew? A goo? Yeah, look closer, I said, offering to hold his coffee. He handed it to me, finished his donut, and climbed up. He held the wire in his hand and gave a surprised whistle. Ooh, this is a new one on me. Mercy, that's odd. Want to take a gander under the hood? I think whatever got into those lights also got into the engine. He hopped down and took his coffee back. I climbed into the cab and popped the hood latch. Boone shook his head in disbelief. Oh gosh darn engine's covered in the stuff. I joined him from the other side, and sure enough, the green and yellow goo was everywhere in there. What the hell? The mechanic tapped the goo with the bottom of his coffee cup. It had hardened. He probably did that. I'm gonna have to take a chisel to it. I'm guessing that's what caused the engine to go kablooey. That probably didn't help the matters, and neither did all the cut wires. Every single one's been chewed through. He pointed at dozens of sliced wires frozen in the hardened amber-like goop. I pulled my shirt sleeve over my hand and tapped my knuckles against it. Solid as a rock. Is there even anything you can do here? What kind of mechanic would I be if I told you no? He said, taking a sip of his coffee. This is a new problem, but even new problems have solutions. Just gotta find it is all. You on a time crunch? I was, but that's all out the window. Sorry to hear. If you can disconnect the cab from the load, I'll get the pusher to bring it around. Start tinkering with it and see what I can find. Gonna be a bit before I have a clue what to tell ya. Truck stop's nice though, lot to do. I'll come find ya. He turned to leave, but I called for him to stop. Hey, you run a wrecker out here by chance? Yeah, we have one, yeah. Usually help the stadies when there's a crash. Why, you see one out there? No, did anybody call for one by chance? I've been quiet as a church fart all night. Anything else, or? I shook my head no, and he left for the garage. I stood there confused. What the hell had infested my truck and ruined it in only a couple dozen miles? There's no way this truck would have started if this had been like this before I left this morning. This happened while I had been driving. The incident with the hitchhiker came to mind, but I pushed that away. A person didn't cause this mess. That said, I'd be lying if I didn't let the thought linger more than I should have. Sighing so loud it woke up the sleeping residents of Omaha. I climbed into the cab to grab a few personal items. I took a seat and started rifling through my cab for my wallet. I leaned back and put my head in my hands. Christ on a bike, do I have shit luck or what? I ran my hands through my hair and headed back into the sleeping berth to grab my backpack. Or I would have if I didn't discover a person cowering under my blanket on my bed. Their trembling, well-worn black Converse were sticking out from the covers. A hide-and-seek champion they were not. They weren't a threat, and people cowering rarely are. But I still wasn't a fan of anyone being inside my truck. I grabbed my blanket and yanked it off to expose a young woman no older than 22 or 23 hiding under the covers. Despite my anger and surprise, I remained calm. She had been crying. Her eyes were swollen and red. Rivers of black mascara had spawned deltas on her ruby cheeks. She was going through some shit. Where is she? Somebody outside screamed. I know she's around here somewhere. She stole my wallet. I glanced over at her and she shook her head no. She silently begged me to stay quiet. Her whole body was trembling. She took back the blanket and tucked herself in. Hey buddy, you see a little blonde tart come through here? I looked down at the quivering mass under my favorite cheetah print blanket before looking back up at the angry trucker. His nose was flat like it'd been kicked in, and he had bloody tissue stuffed in his nostrils. A raccoon mask of purple had formed under his eyes. Whoever was hiding in my cab had done a number on this hothead. He was out for blood. Short hair, about 5'2" or so. Yeah, you seen her? As she came running out of the truck stop bathroom and convinced some dumb schmo to give her a lift. I think he was driving a lifted Chevy. He tore ass down the freeway. You might be able to catch him if you hurry. Unbelievable. Thanks, brother, he yelled, running to his trailerless truck. He was gone seconds later, flying out of mother truckers on a mission. I watched his taillights until they disappeared onto the on-ramp. He's gone, I said. Now, who the hell are you? The woman peeled the blanket down from her face. She broke out into sobs and kept thanking me for not giving her up. I let her tearful spasms end before prodding her again. To aid her speech, I handed her a box of Kleenex, which she eagerly took. After several sinus-clearing blows, she finally spoke. "Claire," she said, her voice still catching. "Thank you." "Okay, Claire," I said. "What's going on and why are you in my truck?" "Sorry, I needed a place to hide. When I saw you were distracted by the mechanic, I hopped in. Assumed you wouldn't come looking if 2 other men were around." "Why were you hiding?" She lowered the blanket and I got my first look at her thin arms. There were a galaxy of black and blue bruises and planets of scarred cigarette burns. She kept her face stern, but tears fell. He was gonna... Jesus Christ, I mumbled. I grabbed my hoodie and gave it to her. She slipped it over her head. Boone was heading back over with a younger second mechanic operating the power pusher. "Come on, let's go inside. It looked like you can do something to eat." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and bounced out of my truck. She was shorter than me by about a foot and weighed about as much as a fly fart, but I wouldn't say she was delicate. Resilient was more apt. She had been through some shit and was still moving. I admired that. The mechanic came up to me and I told him the keys were in the cab. He glanced at the woman and gave me a sly smirk. He leaned in and whispered, "We're gonna need more time than what that'll take, man." "Are getting food," I said. "That's all." He winked. "Hey, of course, of course. And Gus and I will get to working our magic on this thing." I left the 2 to their job and walked with Claire back toward the truck stop. Her eyes kept darting back and forth, and I didn't blame her. "He's gone. I watched him get on the highway." "It doesn't mean he won't come back." "Oh, he won't. Cowards always run," I said, holding the door open for her. She hesitated and winced, waiting for a blow that would never come. Eventually, she walked in and mumbled a quick thanks. Jesus, just what had this guy done to her? The truck stop was indeed as nice as the mechanic had made it out to be. Hospital clean with the same kind of lights. The artificially pleasant smell of cooked sandwiches in the air. Fresh fruits shared a shelf space with chocolate-covered nuts and over-caffeinated energy drinks. Signs pointed down small hallways to showers, bathrooms, and the chapel. There were the traditional gas station accoutrements too, but everything in here is supercharged. If you ever needed a dialed-up walking stick or a DVD copy of Rudy, Mother Truckers had you covered. A breezeway led to a fully staffed subway. The entire staff was playing on their phones, bored with even the concept of work. Can't say I blame them. "Hungry?" I said, nodding at the subway. Something small," she said, grabbing a muffin. "Maybe a coffee too." Grab whatever, it's on me." She eyed me. "You sure?" I nodded. She grabbed another muffin. After paying, we took a seat at a booth near the windows at the front of the subway. None of the employees even moved. I had my back against one wall and kept my eyes on the door. I didn't think the guy would come back, but I've been wrong before. If he did, he'd be furious with Claire and pissed at me. His type always wanted to throw hands. I didn't, but I wasn't above it. My fury might only be of the righteous kind, but fury is fury regardless. Claire ate her first muffin in 2 bites. It's clear that she was starving. "Hey, if you want something else to eat," I started. She waved me off. No, it's fine. Just been a little bit since I last ate." "Who was that guy?" I asked, my voice low. "A friend of yours, or..." "A friend," she said, turning to spit on the ground. "If I had had a gun, he'd have several new holes in his body." She took a sip of her coffee, savored it, and then swallowed it down. "He took me, outside Amarillo." "Took you?" "Yeah, knocked me out, dragged me to his truck, and locked me in a dog cage that he kept in there." "The hell?" "Yeah, he's a psycho. Sweet one minute, and then he put his cigarette out of my arm the next. He would have killed me." She said, her eyes welling up. "Told me he was going to do it yesterday. Said it wasn't his first time. I believed him." "Why didn't you call the cops?" I asked, regretting it as I did. She laughed. Are you serious? As soon as they found out what I do for a living, their investigative drive ends. They ain't calling all cars to find a kidnapped hooker. Half of them think I deserve whatever happens to me and the other half want a free turn. She took another sip of coffee, her hand shaken. I'm sorry, I said, turning away. A way of the world, she said, tears forming in her eyes again. She wiped them away and forced a smile. You saved my life, bought me these muffins, and I don't even know your name. It's Bird Dog, I said. She laughed. I blushed, but after all this girl had been through, laughing at a weird nickname was fine by me. Well, everybody calls me Bird Dog or BD or Bird. My mama named me Cornelius. She laughed again, harder this time. She had an easy way with it, not something that I was expecting. It was a shame that she had to hide it for so long. Your mama saw you brand new and said, I want to call this little boy the light of my life, Cornelius. It was a family name. How'd you go from Cornelius to Bird Dog? Oh, Mama gave me that one too, bless her. Always been a curious dude. When I stumble into something that sparks my interest, I'll go deep. Oh, give me an example, she said, taking another sip. Her hands were still shaking, but less so. There's something that'll get my mind moving in a new direction. You like animals? Sure, what can you tell me about animals? Well, I've been reading about how random species form bonds and work together. Like those videos of a lion and a dog becoming friends. I love those. I laughed. Oh, kinda. Symbiosis like ants and aphids or honey badgers and honey-guide birds. Honey what? So like honeybirds developed an amazing skill to find hidden beehives, but they can't dig them up. It's just not possible with their bodies, kinda like me. I love baseball, but with this gut, I ain't playing shortstop for the Royals anytime soon. Okay, she said, her body relaxing. Right, so honey badgers learned that if they followed the birds, they'll find the hive. Badgers dig up the hive and they eat the honey. The birds come back and eat the wax and the bee larva. It's a win-win for everyone. A tough break for the bees, though. I laughed at that. Yeah, nature can be cruel like that sometimes, huh? Like I said, it's the way of the world. Claire swallowed down a sip of coffee and sighed. I know this isn't actually good coffee, but right now it tastes amazing. You know what I mean? Oh, that's the dopamine hitting. When you haven't felt it in a while, even small pleasures give oversized responses. You read that in a book too? She asked with a small smile. I shrugged and nodded. I went on a kick about the brain a while back. Not much else to do while driving. Might as well make the most of it by learning something new. Smart, she said, nodding out the window at my rig. What happened to your truck? I shook my head. I don't know, to be honest. My trailer light shorted out when I was driving down the highway. After that, everything started acting wonky. By the time that I hit the off-ramp, I was afraid I'd be stranded. I coasted in here on fumes. Did I hear them say something about goo? I nodded. You wouldn't happen to be an expert on strange goop stuck to engine blocks now, would you? I dropped out of mechanic school right before we covered it, and got a book on the subject that I can borrow. I didn't hear her joke because something outside caught my attention. The woman in the yellow knit cap. She walked from the darkness and into the buzzing lights of Mother Trucker's parking lot. She headed toward the truck station's entrance. My eyes went wide and any semblance of a poker face dropped. Claire clued in. What's up? You see that woman out there in the yellow hat? What about her? I leaned in close. I know you've gone through some shit today and I don't want to burden you with any more misery, but her showing up is about to send me to the moon. Is she an ex or something? Right before my truck died, I stopped to help her on the side of the road. She told me she had wrecked her car and needed a lift. I agreed, but before she got into my cab, she disappeared. Claire's face screwed up. What? Like now you see me, now you don't kind of disappearing. Are you saying she's a ghost or a magician? I sighed. I don't know. My spidey senses are tingling though. I've seen some odd shit out on the road, creatures and the like, but I've never seen the same one twice, let alone in the same night. Wait, she's the creature. The front door to the truck stop chimed and the woman in the yellow cap walked in. I didn't want her to find me, but I had to know what she was doing here. I inched toward the breezeway and cocked my ear toward the cashier. Do you guys offer towing? She asked, her voice sweet and soft. My car wrecked a few miles away. It's been a long walk. A mechanic in the garage can help. Name's Boone. He has a beard. Thank you. Have a better night. A throaty laugh. Oh, I'll try. Thank you for your help. The door chimed again as the woman in the yellow hat laughed. I sighed. As I turned, one of these subway employees saw me and nodded. He nodded out toward the yellow-knit woman and gave me a thumbs up before returning to his phone. I'm glad somebody approved of her because I sure didn't. I slunk back to my seat and ducked low, hoping to stay hidden. I wasn't positive that she had been following me, but the tightness in my gut told me that it was possible. Regardless, I kept my eye on her, searching for anything off about her. Her stride, her clothes, her demeanor. Everything seemed above board. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to turn toward me and scream bloody murder, but nothing happened. She ignored us and kept her steady pace to the garage. She never even glanced in our direction. Bird, you okay? I ignored her. She reached out and touched my hand. That snapped me out of my stupor. Bird, I don't think she's a ghost. She's just a regular-ass lady. I shook my head. There was no wreck. What? She told the cashier that her car wrecked too, but there wasn't a wreck anywhere near this place. Oh, Claire said. That is a little odd then. Why would she lie? What's her endgame? Maybe she's a scammer. I know a few girls who honey trap record drivers. Good money if you have the stomach for it. The woman reached the garage, smiled, and waved to the guys inside. She spoke some, but was too far away to catch any of it. My legs itched to get closer, but the monkey's survival lobes in my brain wouldn't let me. Ancestors holding up their hands and warning me to stay back. Dread creeping up my spine and infesting my thoughts on an atomic level despite not having a rational reason why. This woman wasn't some massive brute with evil intent in her eyes, not some ghoul who had wanted to devour my soul. Still, I couldn't shake the buzzing in my skull that something was off about her, that she was a menace in tennis shoes. With my nerves firing, she happily walked into the garage. I waited, my eyes unblinking, for the fireworks to explode. But nothing happened. I let my shoulders roll back and laughed. A sigh escaped. Claire knit her brows. What were you expecting? I don't know, violence maybe. Claire laughed. Oh, from her, the little woman outside. What was she gonna do, blind them with her Julia Roberts smile? Blood rushed to my cheeks. Something's off about her, that's all. Bird, no offense, but maybe you scared her. What? I said halfway to a snit. Not on purpose, but maybe after seeing you she had second thoughts. We've all been there, it's coded into our DNA. But I wanted to help. Consider the situation. A pretty woman getting into a semi with a stranger in the middle of the night. It might have rung an alarm bell in her head. A woman's intuition may have been screaming at her to run and hide. True crime stories all start out that way. Nice guy willing to help until... She trailed off. I hadn't even thought of that. Occam's razor insisted it was significantly more likely than her being a monster. I had seen monsters and they never wore a stylish yellow knit cap. And despite my smile and demeanor, a woman being afraid of a strange man on the side of the highway in the dead of the night made perfect sense. You're probably right, I said to Claire. Probably just gave her a fright. Oh, that's because she saw Cornelius and not Bird. Oh, you're giving the name Cornelius a lot of street cred it may not deserve. She laughed and it was infectious. I started chuckling too. For a fleeting moment, normalcy returned to the truck stop. A wonderful and welcome calm. A funny thing about calm, though, is that it often precedes a storm. The spotlight, a bright white light, hit the gas pumps as a truck cab came crashing into the parking lot. Came to a screeching halt and the driver's side door whipped open. Claire gasped. The man had returned. He'd actually come back. Holy shit, she mouthed, tipping back on her chair. Holy shit. Where is she? He screamed. His eyes were wild and he was holding a crowbar in his hand and had every desire to use it. Scanning the subway windows, he spotted Claire and me sitting together. He grinned and pointed the crowbar at us. Oh, you're both gonna get it now. He took a step toward us but hesitated as a loud electric pop boomed from the garage. A burst of light that temporarily turned night into day. The power inside the garage and half the subway winked out. Who done messed up the power now? Joked the subway employee. The rest of his coworkers gave him a chorus of uneasy laughter. The joke ended when someone in the garage screamed a string of curse words. Words so vile you would assume the speaker was trying to raise a demon. A second later, the younger mechanic came stumbling out of the garage, holding the side of his neck and screaming that something bit him. His hand slipped and an arc of arterial spray leapt from the wound and coated the subway's windows. The lethargic crew snapped into panic, screaming and running into the back of the store. The younger mechanic collapsed to his knees, the flow of blood lessening to a trickle. His eyes rolled back into his head and he fell face first onto the pavement. He was dead before gravity had finished the fall. We both shot up, Claire instinctively sliding behind my body. Her hand grabbed my shirt and squeezed it tight. Fat drops of blood rolled down the window, carving crimson rivers on the glass. What the hell? She shrieked behind me. The angry trucker's resolve faltered and he loosened his grip on the crowbar. It clattered against the ground. The noise woke the man from his stupor and he took a cautious first step back toward his truck. His revenge against Claire was put on hold. Boone came running out of the garage. He was screaming in pain, and if there were words mixed in, it was impossible to find them. He took about 3 steps out of the garage before something blurry sprinted out and kicked him square in the back. Boone went flying, his head snapping back so violently that it was impossible for his spine not to have snapped. I assumed he was dead before his body crashed into a fuel pump, jarring it loose from the cement. My eyes shifted from Boone's body to whatever had kicked him. It was dark and a hair bigger than a German Shepherd. I couldn't make out any other details because it moved with hummingbird-like speed. My brain didn't have time to even process what it had done, but I had seen it before on the side of the road. The woman in the yellow hat strolled out of the garage. She had streaks of blood across her face and clothes. By the way she casually strutted, it was clear that the blood didn't bother her. In fact, she forced a big smile at the trucker standing stock still in the parking lot. "Stay away from me," he said, his voice shaky. He reached down and grabbed his crowbar. It rattled in his tremulous hand. She put her hands on her hips and stuck her lip out in a world-class pout. "Well, that's not a nice thing to say to a lady." He took another step back. "Stay the hell away from me." She didn't listen. Another step toward him. "Or what?" I'll kill you." She started cackling. "Oh, no you won't. Not because you're not capable, but because you can't stop me." She smiled widely as Boone's blood rolled down her cheeks. There was a blur as something zipped past him and disappeared into the darkness. A growing piss stain grew on the man's pants. He ran and hopped into his truck. As he shifted into drive, the headlights cut off. He pressed on the gas and the truck lurched forward a foot but rolled to a stop. He beat on the steering wheel and he screamed. The hood exploded off the truck. It went spinning high into the air, tumbling end over end, before smashing down on the truck's roof. Green ooze poured out of the front of the grill, hardening mid-drop right before it hit the concrete. The hothead was trapped. He struggled to free himself, but the hood had pinned his arm against the seat. His eyes widened in panic. Veins in his forehead pulsed as he ripped at his trapped arm. It didn't budge. Desperate, he took the crowbar and turned it against himself, smashing it against the broken bones in hopes that he could rip it away and run. It didn't matter. The wolf couldn't spring his paw from the trap. The trucker stared at the woman in the knit cap and spat out dozens of vile curses at her. She only smiled and waved. "I hope it hurt," Claire spat. The blurry dog creature leapt from the engine block and merged with the woman. As soon as it had entered her body, there was an explosion of white light and we all shielded our eyes. When our vision came back, the woman began to pulsate. She dropped to her knees, roaring and screaming as all of her limbs elongated 3 feet. Her torso widened to the size of an oil barrel, and ropey muscles rippled down her entire body. Her face followed her limbs and elongated to a point like a stork's beak. Small hooked horns emerged and encircled her skull, creating a laurel of razor-sharp bone. She shook her body and green and yellow feathers emerged from her skin, shimmering in the remaining light of the truck stop. The plumage blew back and forth in the breeze. As she snorted and a glob of that green and yellow goo shot from her nostrils to one of the pumps. It instantly hardened, crushing the metal from the pressure. And gas leaked from the base of the pump, first in spurts but then in a steady stream that flooded the parking lot. The creature stood, towering over the semi-truck, taller than the building that we were in. She raised her beaked head, opened her mouth, and let out a low, rumbling call. An alligator's growl pitched down several octaves. It shook the entire building. The subway windows shattered, sending glass flying toward us. Claire and I scooted away from the falling daggers but didn't run. Curiosity kept me in place. Revenge cemented her to the ground. The man in the truck was screaming, and thanks to the shattered glass, it was crystal clear. I can't imagine what he was thinking, staring down this thing just waiting for the inevitable. How confident was he that he'd get away? Apparently, he was super confident because he didn't stop smashing at his arm. The more he turned his radio bone into dust, the more he jerked it back and forth, praying that it would tear away. Crackling bones and ripping sinew and muscle echoed across the lot. Against all odds, the man wrenched his body free. Half his arm remained pinned to the seat. Blood sprayed from his stump, but he didn't dwell on the wound. He stumbled out of his truck, but his fear caused him to misstep, and he fell face first onto the ground. When he pushed himself up with his one hand, his nose flatter and pouring blood, the woman placed her arms on either side of him and lowered her beak. She croaked out another howl, blowing the man's stringy hair all over. His scream stopped when she drove her beak into his eye socket. With the squelch of a plucked eyeball as our background noise, I uttered, "What the hell are we gonna do?" It was meant to stay in my brain, but the pure fear in my blood forced the sentiment out of my mouth. From somewhere high above the gas station, another low, rumbling call echoed in the night. The woman raised her beak, snapping off the trucker's head, and called back to their skyward pal. A gust of wind sent debris flying as another one of these monsters dropped right in front of the subway glass. The young mechanic's dead body was between its long legs. The creature nudged the corpse with its beak. When it was satisfied the mechanic was dead, it drove its beak into the body, ripping open his stomach and greedily devoured the innards. "We should move," I whispered, gently tugging on Claire's arm. We moved deeper into the truck stop and away from the broken windows. Claire moved softly and quietly, avoiding the shards of broken glass as if they were lava. I do not have a dancer's grace, and with my attention on these monster birds chomping on the bodies of the dead, I wasn't paying as close attention to where I was stepping. The snap and crunch of glass under my boot was as loud as the Chernobyl explosion. Both creatures turned to us, their eyes large and yellow and squinted. The pupils shrank in the remaining light from the subway. I froze. Maybe they couldn't spot us. We stilled our breath. Only the gentle spraying of leaking gas and the short growls from a curious monster were audible. The newest arrival took a step toward the broken window. Its long arm reached into the truck stop and dropped a mere foot from us. The long appendage ended in a 9-inch grappling hook-like claw. It tapped, and the claw hit against the tile, attempting to flush out any prey. We leaned back as far as our balance would allow. Claire was gripping my shirt and started twisting it as her nerves went into overdrive. It got so tight that it restricted my breathing. A second scan. "Screw this!" yelled the cashier from behind the front counter. The front door chimed, followed by hurried footsteps across the wet asphalt. The cashier was making a break for it. I wanted to scream for them to stop, to have some common sense, but self-preservation kept my lips sealed. The woman in the yellow cap's attention left the half-eaten trucker and went to more fresh game. She let out a slow, deep rumble that made the ground quiver. Inside the truck stop, objects fell off shelves and glass broke. Some lights popped, while others vibrated out of their screws and crashed to the ground. There was a bright, white light forming in the middle of the creature's chest, and that quickly overtook all the darkness. I clenched my eyes shut, but the light still danced on my eyelids, creating an orange glow in my conscious mind. The car engine firing up made me open my eyes. The creature had transformed back into a woman. In front of her was the blurry dog-like creature that had merged with her earlier. She pointed at the car and the creature sprinted and took to the air. It flattened itself into a thin strand, squeezed through the grill's gaps and into the engine. The car stuttered and stopped, smoke pouring up from the cracks. The hood exploded off the car, a thin trail of hardening green goo following behind it. A vibrating blurry dog followed the hood out of the car and merged with the woman once more. She stumbled back and dropped onto the gas-covered ground again. Her body twisted and trembled as she transformed back into the monster. The cashier abandoned his dead car and took off on foot. And they didn't get that far. The second creature moved away from Claire and me and flew at the sprinting man. It landed with a ground-shaking thud of those grappling hook claws catching the cashier's shoulders and driving his body against the concrete. I turned away from the violence, but it didn't matter. The ripping of flesh and muscle and the painful scream painted a vivid picture in my mind. "Let's go into the walk-in freezer," Claire said, yanking on my arm. A thought bubbled in my brain folds. Why had the woman spared me on the side of the road but killed these guys? And then it came to me like a divine message. It didn't attack me because it was weak. What? I turned to Claire, my brain knitting a conspiracy that brought everything together. This woman didn't attack me earlier because it was weak. The blurry dog-like thing was weak. It needed power to strengthen. Electrical power, mechanical power. Like from your truck's engine, Claire said, picking up the thread. Once charged, it could merge with her and transform into those. That makes sense. What can we do with that information? I don't know. Maybe we shut off the power to the building and starve those things and they'll leave. Leaving lets them do this again. We have to stop them. Claire, I'm a long-haul trucker, not a monster hunter. I don't have any idea what to do here. She nodded at the growing pond of gasoline. What if we get them into the gas and light it on fire? If fire burns everything, monsters included. I shrugged. Well, that's as good as anything I've got. How do we lure them there? Bait, she said. I hated that I agreed because I understood I needed to be the worm on the hook. I had been the one who interacted with the yellow cap woman. Unknowingly or not, I brought her to mother truckers. She had hitched her out of my truck and killed several innocent people. I felt responsible. The sinking feeling in my gut would never leave if I didn't atone for my sins. We need to find a lighter. They have a case of Zippos near the cash register, Claire said. Okay, I said, my voice not instilling the confidence I had hoped to portray. She paused. You okay with this? No, I said honestly, but we're out of ideas and the thought of these things killing anybody else here is all the motivation I need. I'm responsible for these things, these deaths. She reached out and clutched my arm. We locked eyes and I withered in her stare. She forced me to meet her gaze and with some assistance, I brought my eyes level with hers again. No, you're not. You're as much a victim as any of us. You didn't ask for this, you didn't seek it out. Bad things happen when you least expect them, she said. If anyone can speak on that confidently, I think it's me. Claire had somehow channeled Vince Lombardi and it was exactly what I needed to hear. I grabbed at any remaining resolve that I had hidden within my soul and I went to grab a Zippo. As I rounded the corner, somebody called out to me from behind the subway counter. A terrified employee poked their head up, their eyes wild with fright. What the hell's going on out there? Monsters, I said. God damn, you serious? And 2 of them. They killed 4 people. I knew I should have taken that job at Cold Stone. The extra drive would have been worth it. How many people are with you? 4. Is that everyone who was in there? Except for David, the cashier at the front. He's well, I said, trailing off. The point landed without the guidance of my words. Damn, the employee said. What are you doing? I think I know how to stop them. Crap, you kill all these things and I'll give you cold cut combos for life, bro. Are you sure there wasn't anybody else in the store? No, but probably not. This time is usually dead, he said, instantly regretting his words. I mean slow. Okay, whatever you do, stay in the freezer. Don't gotta tell me twice. Best of luck, bro, the employee said before crab walking away to spread the word. I snuck through the breezeway and into the truck stop proper. From where I was standing, I had a clear view of the creatures outside. And they were chewing on body parts. The wet slap of intestines flopping against the ground turned my stomach. I swallowed down my disgust and tiptoed toward the Zippo case. My fingers found one with the skull emblazoned on the front. That felt appropriate. Either we'd end with them or they'd end us. Death comes for us all but rarely gives us a heads up. Today, death was skywriting the message for everyone to read. I hustled back and handed the lighter to Claire. I'll sneak out the back of the building and walk around. As soon as both of them are in the gas, throw the lighter in and run for the walk-in freezer for cover. This place is going up like a firecracker. What are you gonna do? Run for my life and pray that nothing lands on me. I turned to leave, but her arm found mine. You're a brave man, bird dog. The word you're looking for is dumb, I said with a smile. No, it's not, she said, her voice shaky. You were brave from the jump. You offered help without wanting anything in return. Claire, She stopped me from speaking more. No time. I'll see you on the other side, okay? Nodding, I left her and headed for the back exit. My heart thrummed with a measured rhythm. The pump jack that just keeps churning as long as there's still oil to be found. My nerves were so frayed that I'd come back around to being steady again. Having a task allowed me to focus all my energy on that and nothing else. I'd always been great at compartmentalization, but this was the ultimate test. the final boss of my brain's ability to focus. If I survived this, I'd be able to watch 10 skinwalkers Royal Rumble on the side of the road and not have it bother me one whit. The air was chilly outside. The temperature had dropped a good 10 degrees since I'd first arrived, and the goosebump brigade marched down my body. I stayed close along the wall, not wanting to venture out an inch beyond where I needed to be. I couldn't let them find me before I was in position. It was deathly quiet, and the only noises that found my ears were the wind blowing through the surrounding fields and the occasional bone-rattling call from these creatures. I glanced out at the field directly behind the truck stop. The silvery moonlight fell on nothing but flat grassland. The urge to run gripped me, and I had to physically stop myself. People were depending on me. I may not make it, but I'd rather go down swinging than live knowing that I left others to die when I could have helped them. I rounded the corner of the garage and a wall of gasoline fumes surrounded me. In small doses, the smell was tolerable, but when a lake's worth of gas hits your olfactory system, Lord help you. My eyes watered and the vapor burned my throat. I tried putting my shirt over my face like a mask, but it didn't help me. I slid my body to the edge of the wall. The cinder block was cold against my back. Peeking around the corner, I saw the creatures gobbling up the remains of their last victims. The surrounding concrete was slick and stained with crimson. The pang of guilt rang throughout my body, but I did my best to ignore it. Finish the job now, be sad later. That mantra worked for everything from breakups to firings. Why couldn't it work for monster hunting too? Peeling off the wall, I used the husk of my dead truck as cover to spy on these things. And they were lumbering beasts, moving slowly, bellies full of truck stop patrons. They lowed to one another, having a conversation in guttural growls. I glanced over at the subway window. Claire was nervously turning the lighter over in her hand. Sighing, I readied myself to come around the corner when there was a burst of bright white light that illuminated the landscape. Even though it only lasted a few seconds and I shielded my eyes with my hand, it still scrambled up my rods and cones. When the darkness brushed back, I was temporarily blinded. I rubbed my eyes as if I were trying to erase a mistake. When I opened them, my vision was filled with floaters bouncing around. I shut them again and counted to 10, hoping to chase away the ghosts. It didn't work. The floaters were visible in my mind's eye too. "There's more. I can smell them," the woman in the yellow cap said with a cheerful lilt. "Me too," said a deeper male voice. I opened my eyes, the floaters finally fading, and I peeked around my truck. An Adonis had joined the woman in the cab, dressed in an outfit that wouldn't have been out of place in the Brady Bunch. He was a man out of time, a fossil reconstituted into living flesh. How long have these things been feasting in our world? "Should I call the others to feed?" she asked. And the man didn't respond. He stopped and scanned the building. His eyes were on the lookout for something or someone specific. Not wanting to be found, I pulled myself back behind the truck. From the corner of my eye, 2 gray blurs sprinted past and ran for the illuminated gas price sign. They may have moved on 4 legs like a dog, but they weren't a living thing. More like a focused beam of crackling energy. They snapped and popped as they zipped past. The edges of their bodies were fuzzy, like the great artist in the sky had tried to blend them into the surrounding air. They moved as if they were displacing the atoms in front of them, and not a physical part of this world. They leapt up to the top of the sign and flattened against it. As they did, the bulbs dimmed and burst, their gray skin taking on a more greenish glow. They slid down the sign, sapping the power as they did and leaving a trail of that concrete-like goo in their wake. Once they hit the ground, they took off in opposite directions, encircling the entire truck stop. I ducked into the garage, careful not to draw any unwanted attention to myself. Initially, I wasn't sure what they were doing. If they wanted more food, there was still plenty of obvious electricity to dine on. I glanced at some of the hardened goo in my engine block, and the tumblers clicked. They weren't looking for food anymore. They were looking for us. They were the honeybirds to the yellow-cap woman and Adonis's honey badger. And that made us the bees. Without these things inside them, they couldn't transform into the body-crunching monsters that had been terrorizing us. In their quest for the next hive to uncover, they were vulnerable. This was my moment. I swallowed, shook my head, and sprinted out of the garage. Hey, I was wondering if you two could. Hey, I know you. You gave me a lift to the gas station, the yellow-cap woman said with a wide, friendly smile. In a matter of speaking anyway, you'd be surprised how easy it is to hide on one of those trucks. What are you? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, she said. No one ever does. They were on the opposite shore of the gas pond and hadn't ventured out any further. If our plan was gonna work, I'd need to draw them closer. And to do that, I was gonna have to get into the gas as well. And so I did. Try me. I'm a curious guy and well, this is the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Well, if I tell you, we'll have to kill you, she said in a sing-songy way. Kinda the rules. Can't let the secret break containment into the wider world. Another step closer. The gas seeping into my shoes and socks now. It was cold against my skin. I blocked it out. I assume you're gonna kill me. I can't run and my truck's toast. And I saw what you did to that poor cashier when they tried to flee. That was a dumb thing for him to do, huh? My friend here hadn't eaten one of you in so long, and then here comes fast food sprinting onto his plate, she said with a smile. Though fast may not be the right word. Did you even break a sweat, dear? No, the man said, eyeing me. He took a step closer, leaving the concrete beach and dipping his toes into the gas. And I'm still hungry. It's been a while since he's been here, and you can tell by his clothes. Your species' plumage moves so quickly, so much easier on other planets. We'll need to update them after if we want to blend in, she said, following the man into the pond. I would say we'd take yours, but I don't think they'd fit. You're a bit more healthy than my friend here. Ignoring the barb, I shuffled back again, drawing them deeper. Despite the cool night air gently blowing, sweat beaded on my forehead. I was waiting, dreading, for the moment that their fuzzy scouts returned. That's when things would get real. You aren't from Earth, she laughed. We've always had access to Earth and many other hunting grounds. Another step into the gas. You're hunters. Oh, if that helps you, sure, she said. Another step and she was fully inside the gas puddle now. It's not much of a hunt with your kind, the man said, joining the woman in the deeper part of the puddle. Simple creatures with the survival instincts of a gnat. Oh, he's not wrong, she said, continuing their march toward me. I mean, half of you just offered yourselves up. If I didn't know any better, I would swear you wanted to die. From behind them, their fuzzy companions returned. The woman and the man felt their presence and smiled. Looks like your time just expired. If you want to make it sporting, why don't you start running now? I took a step back, 1 foot out of the gas, and I contemplated running. I glanced at the subway window and found Claire flicking the Zippo open. The sparking wheel brought forth a bright orange flame. Our salvation. I smiled. You know how humans became the head of the food chain on our planet? Enlighten me, the woman said, taking another step. Our ancestors did 2 things really well. The first was to be curious about the world around them. Sure, some of them died, but lessons were learned and passed on to the next generation. And the second? The man asked, joining the woman in the middle of the pond. The second. We took stupid risks. She smiled. On that, we can agree. The fuzzy creatures leapt into the bodies of the man and woman. They fell on all fours as their human bodies began to twist and transform. I locked eyes with Claire and screamed, "Now!" She hurled the lighter and it spun end over end. The flame flickered in the breeze, but it never went out. It landed at the edge of the pond and skidded into the gas puddle. Instantly, the flame ignited the pond, sending a massive orange and blue wave of fire racing over every inch of the gas. I ran out, but not before I witnessed our triumph. The monsters ignited. Their screams were instant, painful, and loud. Their bellowing shattered any remaining glass. They thrashed on the ground, their long limbs smashing into the building and snapping their delicate bones. And the heat melted nearby goo. It reeked as it softened and bubbled on the ground. Even the vomit-inducing smell of roasting bodies was an improvement over the putrid stench of the rapidly liquefying goo. With the wave coming at me, I took off in a full sprint out into the wilderness, but I wasn't fast enough. My gas-soaked shoes and socks burst into flames. The burn rippled through my feet and up my legs. My nostrils filled with the smell of burning leather and charred skin. It blistered and cracked. I dropped and yanked off my shoes and socks, but it didn't matter. The fire was chewing through my clothes. I violently rolled back and forth on the ground, trying to smother any remaining flames in my body. I was still rolling in the grass when the pumps exploded. They went hurtling through the air like a hillbilly rocket. And gravity, being undefeated on Earth, sent the heavy pumps back down onto the squirming and burning monsters. The squish was satisfying. My legs throbbed. The pain was unbearable. Black came to the edges of my eyes, and I was rapidly approaching unconsciousness. Before my eyes shut, though, I caught Claire and the subway employees running away from the intensifying fire. But they weren't sad or scared. They were cheering. Despite the heat and flames and danger all around her, Claire was smiling. It was the perfect image to see before I faded to black. When it was all said and done, everything at Mother Trucker's burned to ash. Officially, it was a horrific accident. All the surviving victims told the same story. The mechanic had accidentally clipped the pump, causing the explosion. Several people died, but only 2 horribly charred bodies were pulled from the scene. The fire had completely erased the other victims from existence. It was a sad story and it made the national news. None of us ever spoke to the press beyond expressing gratitude that we had survived. My burns were pretty severe and I spent the next several months off the road and recovering. I lost touch with Claire and the rest of them. We swore we'd still talk, but deep down we didn't believe that we would. The chance had brought us together when we had needed each other the most, and that alone was a miracle. Another strange happening in a life full of them. I hoped wherever they are, they're doing well. I never received my lifetime of cold cut combos either. And during my recovery, I spent a lot of time reading about interdimensional science. I can safely say I have little idea of how it may work. From what I gathered, there are theories about branching universes and theoretically, we may be able to travel in between them. How, why, or anything else is lost on me. At a certain point, when all the science was coming across like another language, I threw in the towel. I got the gist. This kind of travel could happen. Science may not have proved it yet, but I meet beings that claim they did. If I tried telling anybody that, well, they'd throw old bird dog into a padded cell. That they came to this world was horrifying enough. But what really keeps me awake on those nights when the moon is high, what has turned my understanding of the world upside down more so than any other weird thing that I've ever seen, is the fear that they might come back. God help us if they do. Being a trucker means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change, and constant change means constant danger. This was something that I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then, I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But boy, was I wrong. I had crossed the state border a while ago and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anybody else on the roads for miles and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck rolled a few more meters and then came to a halt. I just sat there for a minute confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention and thinking about it. I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I span around real fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s with graying hair and a mustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you've run out of gas," he croaked, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd be fine and started to walk back towards the truck. "I got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here at this location at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and didn't need any help, and I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this man to go away. I saw him walk off into the tree line and disappear. I called my boss up and he said that he had sent somebody out to tow me, but that it might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the man gone. I woke up sometime later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that somebody had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up, but maybe they tried. I am a deep sleeper and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to work out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and I had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted out to the tower, "Hey, where are we going?" Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage? After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn that we seemed to be heading towards. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so I called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said that the tower wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at my boss, "Well then who the heck is towing me?" My boss called the police and told me to try and get out of the vehicle. I didn't need telling twice. I swung open the door and jumped out. I was winded and I lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped and the tower must have heard the sound of the door opening. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and just chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized the face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking quickly now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer now, calling, Turn yourself in and it'll be quick. I couldn't move anymore now, he would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log, looked around and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away and looking right at me. I bolted back for the truck and made it underneath, the sound of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the woods. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all their questions and told them about the barn that I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When asking what they found, I was told that it was best I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in that truck. However, I do know one thing. That man is still on the loose and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. From a young age, I was told to never talk to strangers, and through my childhood, I never did. However, in adult life, things change, and there's more of a reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when you're lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I'd start giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place that I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people that I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive, I saw a man at the side of the road, with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place that I was going. Usually past a certain time, I would ignore it and continue my journey. But something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop on in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first, I was hesitant, and then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold, very cold. Not the kind of cold when it's been chilly outside, but the kind when somebody has a fever. A wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face and he looked like he was in his late 50s, with a gray beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was, "Pleased to meet you," and I got back onto the road. I decided it best not to try and talk too much to the man unless he had talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy that you would want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside his bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound of metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger that doesn't really want to talk, I would put the radio on, but mine had stopped working last week and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him from staring at me, I asked him, "Hey man, what's in the bag?" I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke, although I knew for sure that it wasn't. Throughout the journey, the rummaging got louder and louder and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled that I began thinking of what to do. I couldn't go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. He then stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had had enough and I pulled into the side of the street. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" And once again he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked him if he would mind checking it out while I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred and then got out of the truck and went around back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my taillights staring after me with what looked like a smile spreading across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood, and I can still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot trying desperately to forget the man, and then I realized that he had left his bag. Obviously, I couldn't help but look in it, but I wish that I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device, from knives and shackles to ropes and bars, and I then realized they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag into the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on it, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, at the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of my registration, and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me, but I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business." I've been a truck driver for some time now, and I've experienced many things on the road. Some have stayed with me for years, while some will probably stay with me forever. One of these experiences will for sure stay with me until the day that I die. I had been placed on a very long journey, taking a load 10 hours cross-country. There was nothing but dreadful music on the radio, and I was beginning to get tired. It had gotten dark some time ago, and it was now extremely late. I decided to call in for the night at the next motel that I came across. I didn't even care if it was a bad one. I now really wish that I had. I pulled up and looked around. The place looked awful. The paint was peeling off the walls and the windows were dirty, and there were multiple letters missing from the sign. The strangest part was that there were no cars in the parking lot. On any other occasion, I would have taken that as a strong warning to stay away, but I had been driving all day and did not have the energy to get back in the truck and drive somewhere else. I went over to the reception and nobody was there. I rang the bell and still no one came. I waited a few more minutes, repeatedly ringing the bell. Annoyed, I turned around and began to walk away, but then I heard a voice. I looked around to see an elderly man with very few teeth grinning at me wildly. He welcomed me to the motel and asked me if he could be of any assistance. I told him that I needed a room for the night and that I would like a room with a view of my truck. He fumbled around for a bit and then threw me a key with the room number on it. I paid him up front because I'd be setting off early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard him say in a muffled tone, "You have a great night's sleep." And then he chuckled to himself quietly. This should have creeped me out, but by this point, I was far too exhausted to care. The first thing I noticed when I entered my room was that it was not facing my truck, like I had asked. Instead, just the dumpsters on the other side of the building. The bed was comfy and the room was big, but I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. There were stains on the carpet, dark stains. The walls were covered in marks and there was something in a plastic bin bag in the bath. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. I lifted the top to see in and I almost was sick. Inside was the head of a pig, not nicely severed like a butcher would do, but a deep and rough cut. This was absolutely disgusting, but as the walls were crawling with cockroaches anyway, I decided it best not to use the shower or the bath, and I drew the curtain across. I tried to forget about what I had just seen. Even after that, I decided to still stay for the night and try to fall asleep. Yeah, I'm not the brightest. I awoke not to the sound of my alarm clock, but the sound of voices outside of my room. It was 2 in the morning. Who would be out of bed at that time? I assumed it was another guest and I tried to get back to sleep. But before I could, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. I flew out of bed and into the bathroom and immediately hid in the tub, trying to ignore the pig's head that lay next to me. The curtain was drawn across, but I could see a small amount from a moth-eaten hole in it. I heard the door swing open and the sound of footsteps as somebody entered the room. I peeked through the hole to see a man in a ski mask walk over to my bed. He had something in his hand. The man threw off the covers and cursed. I then heard the voice of the man from the reception whisper, "What's wrong?" The man in the ski mask responded, "He's not here. Must have left earlier than we thought he would." I then saw the man start leaving and a huge amount of relief washed over me. But he paused, turned around and walked straight into the bathroom. I felt like my heart had stopped beating. I tried to flatten myself into the bottom of the tub, although I knew it wouldn't do much good. He stood there for a good few minutes. I then heard the man cough, spit something into the sink and leave. When I was sure that they were actually gone, I got out, grabbed my bag and left. I used the emergency exit at the side of the building. I ran around to my truck, got in, started the engine and drove off. As I was leaving, I saw somebody in the window staring at me, grinning that nasty, toothless grin. I didn't look back and I got out of there. I had driven nearly 20 miles when I was pulled over by a highway patrolman. He asked me if I was aware that my back doors were hanging open. I told him no when I went out to check it. A large amount of my load had been stolen and many other boxes had been slashed open. I told the patrol officer everything about the motel and what had happened to me. He shook his head in disbelief and told me something that made me gasp. That motel 20 miles up the road. Yeah, the owner died there 4 years ago. It's been abandoned ever since. As a trucker, I travel a lot, travel into places I wish that I hadn't been. And as a trucker, I see a lot, seeing some things I wish I'd never seen. But it is these things that make me who I am. And that's why I love the job, not knowing what I'll run into next. However, unknowing means you cannot foreplan how you will act in certain situations, and I do not make the right choices in certain situations. At all. I was in the UK a while back, taking a load up to the north of England. It was dark with a few stars in the sky. I couldn't quite focus on the road for some reason and I kept fiddling with the radio. A few minutes passed me doing this. I looked up and caught it right in my headlights. Sprawled out on the ground was a body and it wasn't moving. I pulled the truck to the side of the road and climbed out. I approached the body slowly and I cautiously asked, "Are you okay, sir?" No reply. I walked over about to take his pulse, but then I realized there was no need. Blood was oozing out from underneath him, an obvious stab wound. It was clear to see that the man was dead and I knew that I had to call the police. I dialed 999 and explained to them what I had found. They said that they would send somebody out to me and to stay put. A few moments later, I heard a voice shouting and the sound of footsteps, fast footsteps hitting the floor hard. I could make out the silhouettes of 2 men, one carrying a bag, and I knew exactly what that was for. I sprinted back to my truck and clambered in, heart pounding. How could this be happening to me? That was the question thumping inside my head. The man had made it to the body now, one chucking the bag onto it and then running for his car. I hadn't seen them part down the other side of the road. The second man ran over to my truck and started trying to climb up. I opened the door powerfully on his face. He cried out in agony and fell backwards. I did the only thing that I could think to do: drive. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and got out of there as quickly as I could, relieved that I had gotten away in time. That relief didn't last long as I noticed headlights behind me. I was being chased down, and of course, he was much faster than me. The car behind me was gradually gaining. I knew that I couldn't outrun him, but I could sure outsize him. I waited until he was right on my tail and then crushed the brake. I was flung forward into my seat. By the time that I had recovered, he was gone. I didn't know where or how I hadn't hit him. I saw a turning a few yards to the left and could only assume that he had taken that. I put my foot down once again. I wanted to make sure that the other man did not catch up either. I had been speeding along for a good 5 minutes when I noticed something in the middle of the road ahead. It was two cars that I recognized. It was the men, and they had formed some kind of roadblock. 1,000 thoughts were spinning around in my head. Had I really stumbled across something that serious that these people needed me dead? Why would they not just attempt to get away? What do I do now? Earlier, I talked about how in certain situations I make the wrong choices. Well, now was one of these times. I plowed straight through the block and didn't stop. The cops arrived at the scene and questioned me on what happened and how two cars ended up lying wrecked in the middle of the road. I told them what I had done. One man had been hospitalized and the other had escaped on foot. Detectives found fresh tire marks nearby and decided that the man had gotten away by car. It turned out that the men were gang leaders. The two of them had killed the man that I found on the side of the road, who was also identified as the leader of an enemy gang. I still cursed myself that the other man got away. For some reason, I could never shake the feeling that somehow I'll be seeing him again. The mind is a delicate vessel. Feed it too much and it collapses. Feed it too little and it dissolves. But if you keep feeding the mind the same thing over and over, it becomes routine and nothing is out of the ordinary. Or so they say. Over the course of my trucking career, I've seen all manner of terrifying things more than any one person should be subjected to. And it is these things that have made my mind collapse. I hear a noise at night and it doesn't feel like an ordinary occurrence. Instead, it petrifies me. All the terrible things that I've experienced come rushing back to me, and all it would take is a snap of a twig behind me in the forest. My experiences have made me paranoid, but it is this very paranoia that saved my life. I had been driving for what seemed like days, endlessly moving forward along road after road after road. My eyes fixated on the ground in front of me. I was starving, I needed a break, and my Radiohead playlist was coming to an end. I pulled up to a petrol station and filled up the rig. I paid and moved it to a parking lot on the other side of the station. The parking lot was nearly deserted, but a few cars were scattered around here and there. I didn't like the feel of the place. Something about it made me shiver. I shrugged it off and went into the station for a coffee and a bite to eat. I returned to my truck an hour or so later and got in. I had driven a good few miles when I heard a tapping. I slowed my truck down and observed the road around me. There were no other cars, and where did that noise come from? I carried on driving, and after a while I heard it again, even louder this time. What was going on? By now I was incredibly confused, but continued driving nevertheless. After 20 minutes I heard repeated tapping. This time I knew exactly where it came from. It was from inside the truck. If I wasn't so paranoid all the time, I would have passed it off as something in the mechanics making the sound. But I knew I couldn't just assume that. I stopped it at the side of the road and got out. I walked around to the back, and the first thing I noticed was that the clamp had been busted off and that the doors had been tampered with. I was puzzled and opened them up. Inside, everything was as it should be, nobody inside and no boxes moved. It all looked to be okay. I reattached the clamp and got back in. I knew that something human had broken the lock. Maybe they broke it but couldn't figure out how to get the doors open. While this was unsettling, at least I knew nothing was in there. I drove back off into the night. I drove for hours more when eventually I suddenly felt a great uneasy feeling in my stomach. Something was in the back, I just knew it. I stopped the truck, got my gun out of the glove box and marched around. I undid the clamp and flung open the doors, my gun raised. Inside again, I saw nothing. I couldn't believe it. I knew that something was in there. I lowered my gun and was ready to walk away when I saw something shift. Somebody was climbing out from behind some boxes and standing up. The dark figure stood at the other end of the truck. I shot at him and missed. I shot again and again without hitting whoever it was. The thing started walking towards me fast. It had nearly reached me and I pulled the trigger, but my gun clicked empty. I threw it onto the ground and hurled the door shut, feeling pressure put against them on the other side. I managed to clip the bolt in and immediately called the police. They were with me quickly and I explained the situation. One officer opened the doors while the other covered him. Both of them entered the truck and began to look behind the boxes. A few minutes later, they got out and told me that they didn't find anyone, but they did find one thing. A carving of a body with a slit throat had been etched into one of the boxes at the back, and the knife was still stuck in. It was tested for fingerprints, but none were found. A few weeks later, I was driving along when I heard the tapping once again. I couldn't bring myself to look in the back. I just told myself that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I pray to God I was right. I have not been posting lately as I was off on a haul for a while. While on that, something happened to me, something awful. I can hardly close my eyes anymore without worrying something from my past will come back to get me. What happened to me on my most recent haul has darkened my past even more. While my mind tries to repress these things, it also tries to convince me that they are not over, and whoever has troubled me is coming back. I was taking my cargo through the mountains. No service on my phone, no reception on the radio, just the sound of nothing. It had been like this for miles, just me, my truck, and the road ahead. It was very refreshing. Exactly what I needed after the trauma of my past years. I noticed the time and sped up. I wanted to be out of the mountains before dark, but at this rate, it wasn't looking likely. So time went on, and I really had to go to the bathroom. I pulled up and got out. I was finishing up when I noticed something in the not-so-far distance. And this was the first time that I saw it. A creature resembling a man, a large man. I was about to call out when I realized that something was wrong with his face. I slowly came to the realization that this wasn't a man at all. The shocking thing was, it wasn't any animal that I had seen before either. It stared straight at me. The 2-hour silence was finally broken by the loud cracking of twigs as this thing charged straight at me. I sprinted back to the van and got in. I immediately shoved the keys into the ignition. My peaceful trance had been snapped. I slammed down the accelerator, something that I had to do way too much these days. As I began to roll off, I saw the thing burst from the tree line and onto the road behind me. I was picking up speed, but so was the creature. I finally made it to around 20 kilometers per hour. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the thing standing in the road, staring after me with a snarl on its face, if it was a face at all. This thing must have been a seriously disformed man. It had a human's body but the stance of a wolf on its hind legs. Its face much too big for a person. The eyes were not aligned and the mouth had retreated too far up its face. I shook my head and drove on. Another thing for my mind to repress and another thing to make my therapist tell me that I'm crazy. I had covered a lot of ground and had almost made it out of the mountain range. Dusk had fallen hard onto the horizon, and I had almost forgotten about what I had seen. My radio began to crackle, meaning that I was picking up reception, and it looked like my phone had a bar of signal. I was relieved, and in the first time in ages, I smiled. But that smile was ripped away from my face as I looked out of my window. Upon a high rock, up to the side of me was the clear silhouette of the man, its head turned and fixed onto my truck. My heart sank down into my gut and continued its descent as I saw the thing jump off the rock and charge down the hillside towards me. How the heck did it make it this far? There was no possible way for the man to have gotten there on foot. My confusion ceased when I noticed how close it was to me. I sped up, building speed way too slowly. The man was close now, almost able to grab onto the side of the rig. I noticed a corner up ahead. In the wing mirror, I saw him about to jump onto the back of the truck. I turned the corner very sharply. The thing had missed its opportunity and bounded off into the hills. I drove on for many miles. The darkness had settled now. I realized that my radio had stopped crackling and my phone still had no signal. I was sure that I was meant to be out of the mountains by now. I stopped, looked at my map, and immediately knew that I had taken a wrong turn. I had followed the signpost and had taken the sign that had pointed to Main Road. I thought back and recalled that the sign had been pretty wonky and had been tipped upside down. I realized how much of a fool I had been. Obviously, it was the wrong road as the sign its right way up would have pointed the other way. In all my fear, though, I hadn't batted an eyelid. Looking at my map, there was nowhere to turn around for miles. With a heavy sigh, I drove on. As I set off, I could have sworn that I saw something in the trees. Along the road, I kept noticing something walking behind the tree line, but I only saw it every couple of miles. I didn't even want to think about what it was. After what seemed like the longest drive of my life, I had reached the turning point, and I began to swing the truck around. Once I was facing the right direction, I let out a whimper. That thing was standing in the road in front of me. I got a better look at it this time. It was a man, and he was tall and very wide. His face, like I had noticed earlier, was extremely disformed. He began to walk at me very fast. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't wait there and I couldn't reverse. I locked my door and drove forwards, hoping to scare him off. For a brief moment, I thought that I did. He began to walk around the side. I then heard him climbing up the passenger side. I grabbed the keys from my pocket and locked the doors. In the same second, I heard the heart-wrenching tug on the handle. A split second later, and that thing would have been inside. I swore and I drove. The man was pounding on the window now extremely hard, thudding. This was the single most horrifying moment of my life. I don't know what I was thinking, but I rolled down the window a small amount. The man instantly stuck his fingers through, and then I rolled the window up quickly. He screamed and pulled them out, falling onto the roadside. I carried on driving, not looking back once. I made it onto the main road, turned the radio up to full blast, and almost cried when I saw other vehicles. My phone had signal and I called my boss, telling him what had happened. He didn't believe me, of course, and told me to take the next few days off, and that he would book me an appointment with the therapist in the morning. I felt so safe to be back on the busy road. and it was the happiest that I had ever been to see traffic in my life. I lay in my bed that night running things over in my head. As I looked out my window, I was almost sure that I could see something watching me. Surprisingly, I went straight to sleep and didn't wake up for 16 hours. I would never be driving through the mountains again. Recently, I've spent a lot of time staring out of my window at things that aren't there. Not because I'm going crazy, but because I'm not the man I used to be. In my previous years, I was a skeptical man, a rational one of reason and sense. Now I don't know what I am. All I know is that I'm ill. I've stopped seeing my therapist and have started drinking again. Anybody who's read my other stories will know what has driven me to this point. The things that I've experienced have finally pushed me over the edge. But I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here to get my experiences out. They can't stay trapped in my head any longer. They'll tear me apart. I've told many of my stories from across my trucking career. Some make perfect sense when I run them back through my head, but some will forever remain a mystery. And this is one of those stories. It was late, and as usual, I had been driving for hours at that point. The night was black and twilight had long since engulfed the valley. The static of the radio soothed me and I was in a trance. My foot on the pedal and my mind in a faraway place. I had been in this hypnotic state for the last 100 miles, fixated on the endless abyss that was the road in front of me. Suddenly I snapped. Somebody was stood in the road ahead. I wanted to stop. I wanted to slam my foot down onto the brakes, but I couldn't. It wouldn't move. I watched in horror as I plowed straight on through it. I waited for the sickening crunch of bone hitting metal, but it never came. Nothing followed the collision. No sound, no slam, no screams. Just the shock and confusion of what had happened. I didn't look back, just drove on into the night. Hours later, I had to pull up. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't drive any longer. My eyelids were extremely heavy, and it was no longer safe for me to continue on the road. I pulled out the bed and I went straight to sleep. I had awful nightmares of silence and disease. I was alone on a mountain range, a roar echoing down it like an avalanche. The ground shaking, a raging tapping boomed from above as the sky turned from blue into a dark shade of red, as if blood had spilled out across the heavens. That tapping grew louder, a thumping now, crashing and banging like the sounds of war. I woke. The tapping wasn't in my head. It was coming from outside of my truck. This was the most angry sound that I had ever heard, the noise of pure rage. I swept up my gun quickly and crawled up to the window. Outside stood a figure staring back at me. I could only make out his outline, no features, but he was tall, incredibly tall, and he took the stance of a wilted plant. I held my gun up to the window and hit back the hammer and I aimed it at him. He seemed to dissolve into the blackness, fading into the void of the night. I got back into the driver's seat and drove until I could see the light of day. Dawn finally slithered into the sky and I was peaceful. I made it to a fuel station and got out. Almost crying, I filled up and I paid. I didn't understand what had happened in the night. I didn't understand why it was me that had to face these things of such evil. I stood facing the side of my truck. I whimpered. Etched onto the side of my truck was 4 words: "You will never rest."